Some of them may be relevant, because the ones later today. Which is here. Usually.
There is one in this room.
Actually, I think this is just advanced because oh, it does show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The later one, and they have. They have. Can't come tomorrow. So I didn't. No, I'm really happy because the ones that are important. Yeah.
No, no. What is it? Oh, very nice. Yes. Yeah, and that's total institution. Yes, no conflict of interest. Check your emails.
I want to know the audience. So how many PhDs do we have? Okay. Yes. And how many, yeah, how many PhDs do we have? How many postdocs? Okay, all right. And then how about humanities? I know this one's a more humanities centric. And how many STEM? Okay.
What the rest of you?
Yeah. If you're not humanities and you're not STEM, raise your hand. What are you guys?
Education.
Education, okay.
Social science. Yeah, social science.
Social science, yeah, we always have a lot in social science, they do really well. What other disciplines do we have? Art, okay. You can always see that, okay, good, okay, great, well.
We got it. So, well, welcome everybody. We're glad you could make it. This is day one of part one of the 3-part grants workshop. So just a brief overview of how this workshop works, the series. Today and tomorrow, we'll have a series of speakers talking about different funding mechanisms, while also providing some sort of higher level overviews of just what makes for good, compelling grant writing in different areas. So we'll have a talk today about grant writing in the humanities, another one today on RO1 and just sort of general grantsmanship. Yeah, RO1s and general grantsmanship. And tomorrow, I think we'll similarly have a little bit more STEM heavy tomorrow, but in addition to discussing specific funding mechanisms, also some just tips for what makes a good grant funding proposal for anything. So part 1 is these workshops. Part 2, if you choose to continue on, before part 2, which will happen in late May or early June, we'll have 4 different days you can schedule on. You'll need to tell us what it is you're going to apply for, what proposal you're aiming to complete. We'll ask for that sometime before then. We have a deadline already. I think it's in April. You tell us what that mechanism is, and then in preparation for that May meeting, you will submit either if you're working on something like an F31 that has an actual specific aims page or section, you'll submit that. If you're working on something else, we'll help you decide what the equivalent would be for your thing, but basically a sort of abstract overview outline of what it is your proposal will be asking for, what the significance is, what your research questions are. So part 2, you have a critique of that, and you will critique each other's. It's both a peer review session as well as having a faculty moderator who will provide comments as well. So you'll leave part 2 having your specific aims having been critiqued, and you'll head toward part 3, which is to turn in the full proposal for a mock review session. So in that, which will be Zoom based, you'll tell us 5 faculty members who will act as your mock reviewers. You will join a Zoom room with them. They will have all read your proposal, and you'll sit there quietly while they talk about its strengths and weaknesses. And they'll basically do the same sort of thing that actual reviewers will do. So you'll get to see how reviewers will approach reading your proposal. You'll leave all of that with having had a couple of rounds of feedback, having worked closely with faculty members, and hopefully you go on and submit the thing that you have been working on. If you do, if you're a graduate student, you get $1,000. If you're a postdoc, you get $1,500. You don't have to win the award you apply for. You just have to show us that you participated in the series of workshops and that you submitted the proposal you started, and you will be able to get that grant award from the FSU Office of Research. Any general questions about just how this series works? Yeah.
If we had a proposal that we're going to do, but it's before like all these things happen.
We will work with you to come up with a timeline that can fit with it. If it's significantly before, it might just be a little tougher, but like if it's due in August, which I think there's an F31 deadline in August, we'll work with you to make sure we can accelerate your timeline. It'll be up to, like you'll have to work with your faculty to plan your third part, but that can basically happen at any point. Like that's just up to you, your deadlines, and working with faculty to have that set up. But yeah, we'll do our best to accommodate making that possible. Yeah.
Do the reviewers have to be from your faculty?
They don't have to be from your faculty, and for plenty of different mechanisms out there that you're applying for, they may not be, right? So it might be good to come up with a panel of reviewers who will be multidisciplinary, and we can help you think that through in terms of what the review audience for your actual proposal is likely to be. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Was the proposal that you ended up submitting, is it intended to be something that you would do at FSU? As part of that?
I don't think, I mean,
Yeah, it should be something that is gonna be ran through FSU, because they're gonna get indirect costs from that, and that's what's funding the scholarships. However, we've had plenty of postdocs who have gotten faculty positions and have then used the resources that they garnered over these part 3 workshop to write their first proposal at their new institution, and that's fine, but of course it won't come with a scholarship, but you'll have the benefits of the knowledge.
And what if it's a collaboration between us and a faculty member somewhere in another institution?
other questions? Okay, well, I mean, for those of you who decide to continue on, of course, we'll answer your questions. We'll help you through it. We'll do what we can to make this work for you. So let me briefly just introduce the schedule of speakers for today. And our schedule might change a little bit from what was advertised as we wait for speakers to arrive. So we might wind up going in different order based on who's here. But we're going to kick things off with Dr. Fadul talking about just a general welcome and an overview of grantsmanship. Kay Jones will talk about USDA fellowships, U.S. Department of Agriculture fellowships. Alan Spector will give a talk on biomedical grantsmanship and the NIH R01. We'll have a brief break as well, so you get up, stretch your legs, get some water. If we stick to the order of things, then after the break, Laura Perez-Felkner will discuss both the NAED Spencer Dissertation Fellowship. So those of you in education, this will be the one most relevant for you, as well as the AERA Fellowship. After that, NASA Hicks from the Department of History will discuss best grant practices for success in humanities proposals. And then I will wrap things up covering the Charlotte Newcomb, the Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship, and the Fulbright U.S. Student Program. Again, order subject to change, but those are the topics we will be covering.
Okay, so as you can also see on the bottom here, when we move to part 2, we will also have peer mentoring networking. And so we're going to have scholars who have been awarded these different types of extramural funding, and they're going to be here to help coach you during the writing workshops in part 2 and part 3. Okay. This is the lineup for tomorrow. So the same lecture you'll hear me in a moment will be tomorrow. And then the F31, F32 National Research Service Award from the NIH will be by Jim Fidul. Then Hengli Tang will advance to the R03 and the R21. Linda Ryman will be talking about the transitional awards, the K99 ROO. And then Beth Stroop will be talking about American Heart Association. And then Emily Moriarty Lemon will address the NSF GFRPs and the NSF postdoctoral fellowships. We are really lucky because the faculty that have prepared these lectures and given the time to come and talk with you, they are all panelists on these review panels. So they've seen the inside scoop of this. So they're really going to tell you the ins and outs of grantsmanship. Okay. Lots of things about eligibility, etc. Okay. So this is what they intend to tell you. So they're going to tell you what the eligibility is. Because we have some individuals that are domestic, we have many more that are international. So they're going to let you know from the get-go what one you are eligible for, so you don't waste your time researching a proposal that you're not eligible for. They're also going to tell you about the application components, because writing the research project is just one component of many items that are evaluated in these fellowship applications. They're also going to tell you about all the supporting documents that are required. And some of these, particularly at the NSF and the NIH, maybe also at the USDA this season, have changed. We were looking and some of them changed 2 days ago, okay? So they're going to tell you about the supporting documents, but whatever mechanism you select, constantly be looking at the guidelines all the way up to the day before it is due. I had a grant once, they changed all the form pages 2 days before. You know, you're like, but it happens, okay? They're gonna let you know how much pilot data are required and how much has to be generated from you, or can those pilot data be generated by those in your research group to show feasibility. They're also going to tell you common mistakes in designing your first grant application. And the number one mistake is that you are too over ambitious, that you design too much for the period of time. That's the number one thing we see. How long is the grant award? Because you need to plan for your research, your science, your creative activity. How long is that grant award? And you have to mirror that with the depth and the technicality of your project. And what is provided? Sometimes just a stipend is provided. Sometimes there's training related expenses. Sometimes there's travel. So they'll tell you about what's provided. And then is there a pre-proposal? Because sometimes not everybody gets to write a proposal. You have to write a small pre-proposal to then be invited to prepare the full proposal. Sometimes there's an oral interview. And then they'll also talk about what the current rate of success is. So you can rate your project with which funding agency you think would prefer? All right, so why should you submit a grant? Why should you prepare this? Why should you do this? Because it's a lot of work. Okay? And the reason you should do this is because being able to express your idea is really pinnacle as both a postdoc and a doctoral researcher. It's so important that now many of these funding agencies, the top thing they're scoring is not the approach of how you're attacking that research, but what is the idea? Okay, if it works out and the research is successful, what are you going to fund? Okay, and so this is just a little schematic. I study sensory systems, so there are vision, smell, taste, tactile, and auditory. And so my institute is a particular institute at NIH that's called the Deafness and Communication Disorders. And so it's really important to express that idea with the directors of those programs. You need to call them, you need to email them, send them your ideas and see if your idea matches what they're currently trying to fund. Okay, that's the most important thing. And it's not unusual to call a program official. You're not trying to brown nose or get the inside scoop. They expect you to call them because they want to hear what your ideas are. Because your idea might be more suitable for a different division of that funding, and they will direct you there. Okay. All right. So having a planned roadmap of your proposed work that has been rigorously examined by individual experts will really save you time. So you're going to assemble a 5-member panel that will review your proposal internally before it even goes external. So that way you get one round of review before it even goes out. So that's a tremendous advantage. And I encourage, we're trying to teach you that practice as PhDs and postdocs, because sometimes junior faculty don't do that. You know, they're kind of afraid to express their ideas or have somebody else read it. It's much better to have experts read it internally than to have it go nationally and have somebody read it and there's some major flaws in it that you could have fixed. Okay. And so this is what I kind of envision. You're taking your research notebook and you're designing experiments and you're going to publish those experiments. And you can do it with a solid plan that you've thought out through a proposal, or you can take this route. You're going to get the same end product, right? But it's going to take a lot longer. So rely on those experts. And then when you send your grant proposal federally, then you're also going to get 3 experts there, at least minimally. And so those eyes are going to be the same ones that are going to be reviewing your published work sometime. And so take advantage of that opportunity. All right. Allows you intense thinking period. Okay. And by this, you're going to be reading, you're going to be thinking. I warn you to have you be the reading and you be the thinking and not it be AI. There are many funding institutes that prohibit AI. Okay. So you need to be reading, you need to be thinking, you need to be bouncing this off your peers and getting feedback of what their ideas are of your ideas. Okay. Really bounce ideas off of your peers. Okay. And that's something good to do your whole career. All right. Why should you design a grant and submit it? Makes you consider the big picture of your research. This is what I like to, here's my analogy, shopping mall. Okay. So who's your customer? You have to know who your customer is. If you're selling something, you're selling your research idea. Who's your customer? What do they want? How do you know that that's what they want? You got to really make sure. Okay. How do you place your ideas into context to make it sellable, to make it marketable? What's everybody else's product? Okay, because you got to compete. Okay, how is your product better? Okay, once you get your loan, you can build any store you want. You can do any research you want, but you have to write the proposal that will get the loan, that will get the scholarship, that will get the funding. Okay. You have to generate a product. So regardless of what you end up doing with your loan, you have to generate a product. And it's good to have some stock supplies. It's good to have some pilot test liability. Okay. All right. Your submitted grant can be used for more than just this writing a grant, this extramural review. Okay. So if you think about it, your grant can be used for a lot of things. You can use the proposal for your doctoral prospectus. Presumably the 5 people that you choose as a PhD student are the 5 people on your dissertation committee. So then you got one thing checked off already, right? You can use your proposal for your research statement in your job application. You can also take your research proposal and you can use it for background introductory material for a review paper. You can also take all the prepared images, your websites, all of this you can use in oral presentations. You can use it for conference posters. You can use it for talks. Okay. All right. Last thing here. It's going to make you competitive on the job market. That idea that you designed was reviewed by experts and approved by funding. And that means something. Okay. So it demonstrates when there is a job committee panel, it demonstrates that you're organized, that you're an effective communicator of ideas. It makes you knowledgeable about your broad field of research. Your resume, your CV is higher impact because you've had funding. It sets you apart from your peers. And then something you may not know is that institutes and universities, they will comb federal databases and they will search for young scholars that have been funded, and then they'll invite those scholars to apply for their open opportunity. Okay, so it kind of opens the doors for you. All right. There's also a time when it's not good to write a grant. Okay. And so I want to share this with you because it might be one of those times. It may be not a good time for you to write an application. And here's some times when it's really not a good idea. It's not a good time to write an application if you are not a very strong writer. Then you need to garnish extra help. This is not me correcting one of my trainees. This is me getting corrected by my last sabbatical host, okay? I am not a strong writer. So I had to learn to be a strong writer. And when I prepare, whether it's a manuscript or a grant, I have to seek help and I have to do that at his time. So it takes me longer. So if you are preparing manuscripts, then it's important to have manuscripts in your resume as part of the supporting document for your grant. So you want to balance the timing of writing that grant and also getting out your manuscript. So it might not be a good time because you might need to do that manuscript first. And you can ask your advisor about that. Okay. You might be still completing your coursework. So then it might be too early because you don't have the knowledge base yet. You might be too senior for a grant award. So you might be too junior because you're still doing classes. You might be too senior because maybe you're a 5th-year PhD student and in your field, they expect you to be done on year 6. And by the time you get the award, you should already be done. So they're not going to be so excited to fund you. Okay, so you can be too senior as well. Maybe you didn't perform academically that well in the classroom. Some of these fellowship applications have your transcripts with them, okay? And they can see your activity, okay? Maybe your advisor has time conflicts and they can't commit to helping you because part of their application is to devise, some of these have 5- and 6-page training plans that your advisor has to write. Your advisor also has to help prove everything that you're writing as one of those experts on your panel. So you have to make sure that it's a good time for your advisor as well as for yourself. And then lastly, maybe you don't have an expert to help you with the planned research. Maybe it's a great idea, but you don't have all the resources you need to make that research successful. Any questions about any of this? You guys can stop me any way along. I have a few more things of when it's not a good time. You may have a conflict with an off-campus experience. You may have been asked to do a really neat research experience, and it might conflict with the time and you just can't do both, okay? It might be a poor match of what you want to do with FSU's environment. So you need to explain to the panels of experts what the unique resources here at FSU are that can help you with your planned research. And if we don't have one of those items, then you have to get a letter of expertise to have some type of collaboration so that you have defined access to that environment or that piece of equipment. Okay. Maybe you're really shy and no one knows your experiences really well. So you've got to bridge and make some networking relationships before you put in a proposal, okay? Because they've got to speak to your abilities. All right, so what type of peripheral preparations are needed? So we talked about there's a book that's going to describe your science, your research, your creative effort, but these applications also have other supporting documents. And you have to think about these because they take some time to get together. So if you're going to work with vertebrate animals, if you're going to do human subjects, then you have to have approval for those or have submitted those at the same time as you submit your application, because they won't bring your funding unless you have these approvals. You may be using recombinant DNA, viruses, hazardous materials, select agents, and all of these have to be described in your application. There may be a conflict of interest. It may be a conflict of interest because one of your reviewers is also going to serve as a letter writer, or you might have a financial conflict of interest. So you have to think about those. You have to approve the budget. And so some of these have very simple budgets, but if you are, and they're fixed, you know, they say, oh, you're a second year scholar, you're going to have this much stipend, you're going to have this much health insurance, et cetera. But some of these have more advanced budgets. So if you're writing an R21, an R03, if you're writing the K99 ROO, that's $1 million budget. Okay, so you need help with creating that budget from your reviewers, and you can get also help with the fiscal office in your departments. You need departmental signatures, so that takes some time. Whatever your deadline is, you need to back it up at least 5 business days. So don't wait to the very end because it's got to go through several offices. Okay. You don't have to have that final preparation, the final wording you can put through while you're still working on the research proposal, but all of that other materials have to be in order and have to be finalized. Okay, then you get your signatures back, you pop in your last version of your research and you're ready to go. All right, there's form pages. You've got to navigate these, and we already talked about, you know, keeping on track of the announcements for the changes. You also have to navigate this internal software because some of your grants are going to go straight to the agency. Others of your grants and fellowships are going to go into this software at FSU that's called RAMP. And then RAMP auto-generates your grants in the format of however that agency would like, and it submits it for you. So you have to go through this. So you have to learn that as well.
Do some of the foundation grants, are any of them still independent of RAMP, or do they all go through RAMP?
It depends on the application. Yeah, so all of your NSF and your NIH are going to go through this, but your foundations, it's application by application. Yeah, you have to check ahead of time. All right, And then sometimes you have to have registrations. So there are people at FSU that will help you get a username or a password for a particular agency, because it's got to come from FSU. All right. So here is my big advice, is to find a mentor. Okay, and this is a colleague of mine, Mary Lucero, and she was about 5 years my senior. And what Mary did for me was wonderful. She got me copies of both her funded and her unfunded applications. And by looking at those and comparing them, I could see what was the best way to express and sell my research product and what didn't work well. And I got the critiques from both of those. So talk to your colleagues, try to find a mentor. In all of your departments, people have submitted applications before you. And you can go to those students who are now alumni and ask them what's a good application and what's a less competitive application. Okay, and ask lots and lots of questions as you go along. Okay. All right, so here's the logistics of our workshop. So as Keith was saying, in about 2 weeks after we get all of the video material up on the web, we've already got the slides. The slides are already there if you haven't checked it out. And so we're going to ask you if you think from the first part 1, are you going to advance to part 2? And so we'll need a commitment at that time. And then at April 15, you're going to set up the abstract of your idea. And you're also going to set up your own OneDrive. Okay, so that means that you're going to invite individuals that are going to review your application. So you need to identify those 5 individuals. Now, there's going to be a couple of OneDrives that you're going to have. The first OneDrive is going to be a OneDrive with individuals that are in your similar group, that are going to be your peer writers that are going to write the same application as you. Okay. And at that one, we will ask the faculty moderator to set up with you and your other peer writers. And that will be the first OneDrive that you're going to upload your specific aims to. And so your specific aims are going to be here May 1st. You're going to submit them. And then everybody in your group has a couple of weeks to read each other's specific aims. You'll be in a group of, 4 to 5 people. You'll read their specific aims and you'll have comments for them. They'll have comments for you. Okay. And then that will take place either May 13, 14 or June 3rd, 4th, depending on your group schedule. Okay. And this will be moderated by a faculty member. And then here on August 10th, you're going to use your own OneDrive where you've invited your 5 faculty reviewers, and you're going to submit your full proposal. And then they're going to have roughly a month. And that's how much time you need them to read, because it's a deep critique. Okay. And then on these 2 time blocks are when you're going to meet with your mock study section, and they're going to give you feedback. And as Keith mentioned, if you have a proposal that's earlier, these can be done not in these blocks, just according to the schedule of your 5 reviewers. And you can also, if you are submitting something very early that we can't accommodate you, let's say, you're submitting something in 2 weeks. Okay, something really hard we can't do. Okay. But that happens. Okay, because sometimes opportunities are only once a year. So you go ahead and submit that. But then you take your full proposal and your specific aims and you complete the rest of these, because it's more than likely that you're going to have to go back in with a revised application, and you're going to have it all ready, because then you'll have gone through this whole exercise. Okay. All right. So I think that was my last slide. So do respond to the Qualtrics near the end or the middle of March, and all the visuals are going to be online, including the videos. I think there was a couple of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, please. The reviewers, maybe the same persons we have in our committee.
Yes. If you were a PhD student, absolutely. They can be your 5 members, because then they hit 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Because they're going to review your prospectus. They're just going to be reviewing a big proposal. Then you have that checked off. And for postdocs, they can be any experts around the world. Yeah, around the world. They don't have to be at FSU. That was the freedom that we gained with Zoom. So, yeah, pick your colleagues. Yeah,
So did you say we would also be working with peer editors, like we'd have peer reviewers? What if no one else is working on the same fellowship that we are working on?
oh, then we'll cluster you. We'll cluster you because there's still things that are kind of similar. We've never had one where we didn't have at least 3. So you'll have peers. Okay. And then you'll have to explain to them, you know, kind of what the format is of the mechanism that you're shooting for. All right. So with that, let me I'll bring Kay up next and I'll get your slides ready, okay?
So, can you hear me? Yeah. Debbie's funding record would suggest she is a good writer.
But it takes a long time.
So I'll just start on, believe it or not, we're still operating under the USDA Farm Bill that we've been operating on since 2018. It's been renewed with continuing resolutions. So it's still, you know, that's just the way things go. Oh, thank you. So USDA proposals are looked through National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Honestly, it's some things are listed as NEFA, AFRI. AFRI funds actually USDA ARS sites too. So it you know, look for things that say both of those acronyms. But most of the outside competitive grants are all housed within NEFA and AFRI. So these are the areas of foundational programs and priorities under this Farm Bill. Now, the funding lines are very different across, they're on here too, across different areas. So food safety traditionally would have funding lines as low as like 30% or something. So I think things like that are where USDA traditionally gets its reputation of being a fairly low cutoff. But in things like plant biotic interactions, what?
I'm sorry, like I'm pointing to my friends.
Oh, okay. In things like plant biotic interactions, it's you know, like 10% and things like that. So now, right now with food safety, but your work has to fit within one of these priority areas. Now, cross-cutting with that, there's also project types. There's research. This can be fundamental or applied. Education. So if you are a postdoc in education who wants to develop a project to educate students on plant production or things like that, it would be in education. Extension, this is, you know, helping farmers direct. And then an integrated project has components of all of these. So since we don't have an extension office here, that's not really something you would do here. Now, unfortunately, these are limited to US citizens and green card holders, but green card holders are of course eligible. They vary greatly from year to year. And these used to be called, as with most agencies, a request for applications. Now they're called NOFOs, Notice of Funding Opportunity. And I put all of these links on here because, as Debbie said, checking these all the time is important. And USDA is notorious for changing things at the last minute. So this is a tight timeline. For now, postdoc and pre-doc grants are within education and workforce development. So this is another area that crosscuts with these, research, fundamental research in NEFA. So you have to have all of the pieces for education and workforce development, for the main NEFA, all of these. So within education and workforce development, you absolutely click download the NOFO, because the information that is actually scrollable online is not very much. So the full packet is necessary. Also, talk to your mentor about interfacing with the grant specialist in your department. If you don't have one, then get in touch with the person that's designated for that agency in sponsored research. So I see some bio people. Virginia Carter is one of the main grant specialists in our department, for example, and she is very good at monitoring these things. You need to give them an early heads up. You cannot go in there and say, oh, I'm thinking about submitting this thing that's due. You need to let them know when you're thinking about it. And so this new NOFO came out for USDA Workforce Development January 20th, and unfortunately they've allowed a very tight timeline. So postdoctoral deadline is going to be April 30th, and pre-doctoral is April 16th. So the program goal in this part of education and workforce development is to prepare the next generation of scientists for working in agricultural research areas. So you need to keep checking these updates, both in education and workforce development and in the main NEFA. So I've got all those links on there. You want to think of this as a very poorly written materials and methods, where some of it's in the main document and pieces of it are in like 2 different supplemental documents. And you've got to put all of that together and keep monitoring, and it's still changing, and keep monitoring it. So things are distributed, different relevant pieces, because all of these things cross-cut across these different areas are distributed across these documents. So, again, the fellowship applications have to be in these AFRI priority areas. Unfortunately, as I said, U.S. citizen or green card holder, a former undergrad of mine is a postdoc in Switzerland, and she can apply for Swiss postdoctoral grants. So I don't know. But anyway, so postdoctoral fellowships, that's the program code. You can search for that directly. Deadline April 30th. This is $244,000 salary over 2 years, up to $60,000 allowed for other expenses. Resubmissions allowed. And if you do that, you have to include a response to previous reviews. Pre-doctoral is 3 years. This will cover stipend and tuition. I think there's a tiny institutional allowance on both of these now, which is in lieu of overhead, but it's like $3,000 or something. But I mean, that's money that you don't see that gets absorbed. Oh no, what have I done? Okay, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so I cannot emphasize enough contacting the grant specialist in your department, or there's a sheet. If you look at our sponsored research office, if you don't have a grant specialist, and ask your mentor, who is this person? I might not know who this person is, unless someone tells me. If you don't have one, you'll need to talk with the person in sponsored research who manages that funding agency. And they have a designated person. So you have to get registered through RAMP in many cases in order to get the full application package. And your grant specialist is going to get you set up in the RAMP system. you can't do this rogue. You can't do this on your own. It all has to go through institutional approvals and be, in compliance. Grants compliance with institutional regulations, et cetera, is an entire field of, of work. So they need to vet all of these things. Right now, main sponsored research, not your departmental grant specialist, but main sponsored research has increased where you have to have everything submitted to them from 3 days to 5 days. It's still 5, isn't it? Yeah. So that means your local person helping you has to be done and have help you get ready to upload to ramp. Now, you can still be making tweaks to your project narrative, but you have to have every supporting document in there that 5 days in advance for them to go over. Okay, so this is just what this looks like. Look at the current fact sheet. For predoctoral and postdoctoral, you won't have all of the insane nuances of a budget, but you certainly want to have, if you have, for postdoctoral, if you have some other expenses, you want to have some budgeting in there. So this is what the ramp management portal looks like. It's one of those things in the MyFSU, where you get into Student Central and things like that. It's one of those many things on the sidebar. Okay, so there are 2 sets of pages. There's this long guideline, and then there's also review criteria. And I've taken both of these from this site that says applications resources. So there's a whole set of documents at that page. Okay, so what do you need to include in these USDA pre-doc and post-doc? You'll need to have project summary. It says approximately 250 words. It used to be a straight cutoff. So you absolutely have to have the project type. Is it research? Is it education? Is it extension? Not here. Integrated? Probably not here. Relevance of the project to the goals of pre or postdoctoral program. So you've got to remember 2 things. The goals, this is the education work for development. So your development is part of the project. But then you'll also have the relevance to the foundational program area that benefits U.S. agriculture. You have to explain the relevance to both of those. Make it all explicit. Make it bite-sized. The project summary is what people in Congress read. Adjust your expectations for their ability to understand that appropriately. Okay. For the project narrative, 12-point font is mandated, 10 pages for postdoc, 6 pages for pre-doc. If this is a resubmission, there's a page for response to previous reviews. This doesn't count in that page limit. You have to have in here a training career development plan, a mentoring plan, and a project plan. And for postdoctoral, quote, this should be totally independent of the mentors. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to go pioneer a completely new system necessarily or something. It just means, what is a question that differs slightly from your advisor's main interests? You just have to state how this is going to be different. A predoctoral also discusses proposed curricular activities. You absolutely, over and over again, have to explain the specific relationship of the project's objectives to those of the program area priorities. You know, if it's planned health, you have to explain that. And they have to be specifically identified, be explicit, repeat it often. Now, for the actual research approach, let's see, did I get? Yeah, rationale and significance, approach and specific aims. So, specific aims I have up there. So that's extremely important. What are your goals? Then your approach is how you're going to fulfill those goals, how you're going to answer those questions, how you're going to address those hypotheses. You can set these things up as question-based or hypothesis-based. That's a level of organization that's up to you. But what's the hypothesis? A lot of one way they used to organize this for USDA is to ask reviewers to state what is the central hypothesis of this grant. So you can feed that to them. You can say the central hypothesis is this. But that's where you look at the review criteria. What are the reviewers asked to do in evaluating it? And I've put the link to the review criteria on there. So how is this approach? How are these aims going to address this hypothesis? What if it doesn't work as planned? How am I doing on time?
You got it.
Okay. When they say potential pitfalls and alternative approaches, they're not kidding. In fact, I like to have a little section that says expected outcomes, potential pitfalls, alternative approaches. Feed it to them. How will your results advance the field? Why will your results be significant? How is that relevant to U.S. agriculture? This is an extremely important pathogen and that decimates U.S. agriculture. But what are the milestones? At what point are you going to say, okay, I've got this result. I will make a decision whether to do X or Y at this point. What are, put it in terms of deliverables. This will be a publishable unit. Then we'll move on to the next thing. How will that fit into the timeline? This part is difficult. It is very hard to know, to project how long things will take. And this is where what Debbie said about ambition, being overambitious, fits in. Because you are going to have reviewers saying, yeah, right, they're going to do that in 2 years. But you can say, these are things that could be followed up later. This is what I plan to do in this time frame. But I expect this will open the door to these questions regardless of the outcome. This outcome could lead to this question, this outcome could lead to that question. Make it as, add that projection there. Make them think you're thinking about your faculty position. What's the plan for disseminating results? How is this going to help? The obvious thing is a publication. If you do not publish this, that is a project that has not gone as you hope, well, as it needs to. And then the evaluation plan. This is separate from the milestones and timeline, because here you also have to evaluate the training career development, how this is contributing, how this is, your development. Did you also take a plant course at Cold Spring Harbor? Did you also do, things like that? And how it fits with the mentoring plan and so on. So it is a lot to shoehorn in those pages, but, for a pre-doc particularly, but these are, make it explicit. So it really helps the reviewers if you make your statements explicit. So often when one is in a student's committee meeting or something. A student puts all the pieces together in what they say, thinks what they've said is obvious to the group, and then doesn't quite pull it all back together because they think it might be too pedantic. Always remember, these are people who are not in your head with you. They are not even on. It's easy to do because you're in your own head, of course. But pull it, I once said to a student, you want to make that explicit. I know you think you just said that, but you didn't finish saying that. Make it explicit. And also remember, after your reviewers have read X number of proposals, they may be very tired. If you make this explicit and they say, well, yeah, this will do that. I agree, but you don't expect them to infer that on their own. And these are the other documents. I've thrown them all up here to try to be complete. This is in those things, but bibliography and references cited. Okay, of course, that's always another document. Facilities and resources, of course, that's always another document. Equipment, the key personnel, also pretty standard. Academic standing for postdoctoral, that means documentation of your PhD. Predoctoral, letter from thesis committee with advancement to candidacy. I think this does include transcripts. Logic model. Okay, I forgot to say it on here. For integrated programs, it's absolutely required. This is how they document the flow between research, education, and extension. It is strongly encouraged now for purely research proposals, but not absolutely required. A logic model is really, it's one of these Six Sigma things that's really needed when you have lots of different offices and PIs involved. So that's, but they try to bring it into this too, which is a little painful, but give it a try. Management plan. This is absolutely required for integrated program projects, encouraged for all project types. This is a good thing to do. How will you interface with your advisor? How will you meet with your advisor? How will you manage your interactions with your thesis committee if you're a pre-doc, etc. Data management plan, this is separate. This is good and important that we're doing this now, because it's how will you archive your data. If it's omics data, where will you post that? Make clear that you know where the current platforms for posting that are, things like that. Documentation of collaboration. Will you have collaborators? Are you co-advised? Things like that. Preprints and press, if applicable. Expanded key personnel. You are the project director. Your advisor is not a co-PI. Your mentor will be other key personnel. This is where you'll put biographical sketches. I think no, that's for the letter of commitment. Current and pending support. That's where, and that's something that gets generated through. Actually, it can be generated through PubMed, or not PubMed, but NCBI if you are signed into that. What's it? Science and is that what it's?
Science and CV.
Science and CV. Yeah. So you have to do that now for stuff. And then budget. This is standard France.gov budget. So it is a little odd to have a budget if they are not giving you much money for supplies, but you still need to do it and explain how it will fit, because the postdoctoral grant does have And then there may be supplemental info for the specific program. So, yeah, these are a blast. So this is where they really need all this stuff early, because this is what they check for compliance, because, you know, your institution also has to check box all of the things like your animal protocol, your recombinant DNA protocol. Yeah, it's in there, you know, your advisor will have filed one at some point, and that will exist if you do recombinant DNA. So review criteria. So merit of the application for research, education, extension, you know, whichever area you're applying to. If it's just research, obviously you won't be judged on the others. Qualifications of project personnel, adequacy of facilities, and like if you have an extension proposal at an institution that doesn't have an extension office, that would be a clear case of that is not an appropriate facility. Project relevance to the specific program area priorities. This is if it's plant health, you know, make that case for plant health. And then within each of these, there are specific lists of points for evaluation. This is here. I'm not going to list all of those. You know, that would be an even more cluttered presentation. Don't blow any of them off. So 1 year when I was doing this for USDA for plant biotic interactions, they changed. I had an earlier version. They changed it at the last minute, like Debbie said, and I had to write whole new bits about justification, like at the last minute, because it's like a trick. So, and then reviewer guidelines. Okay. Don't go too broad in your introduction. This isn't where you tell them everything you ever learned about your area. This is where you tell them exactly why it's important and exactly what they need to know to understand the problem and your aims. You're not writing a comprehensive review, you're writing a focused review. Don't underestimate the importance of considering potential pitfalls and alternative approaches. You don't have to consider every potential pitfall. Pick your favorite, those for which you have a solution, and a tired person will say they've considered potential pitfalls and hopefully won't think of every potential pitfall. This really has an impact on the reviewer. They go, you know, they're really thinking. They're really, you know. And I guess that was it. So sorry if I went over. Okay. Sorry.
Slides and the one slide summary that she had with all of those supporting documents, those are very common to all of the fellowships. Like there's probably not one there that she had that's not in many of the applications. We do have a science and research librarian renamed Julian, and he can help you formulate data management plans. So we do have resources like that.
Yeah, and I mean, have fun with your project proposal, you know, with your project narrative, because none of the rest of it will be fun. I promise you that.
Okay. All right, I'm going to pull out Dr. Spector's slides. There you go. All right, take it away.
I'm Alan Spector. I am a faculty member in psychology department of the program in neuroscience. I've been asked to talk about biomedical grant writing and especially the RO1 mechanism. But the truth is, most of what I'm going to tell you today can apply to any number of grants. Okay. Now, I can't tell you how to write a grant in 30 minutes. In fact, it would take many hours and a lifetime to perfect. And a lot of the details you can get just by reading the instructions. So read the instructions, read them twice, make sure you follow them. It's really important. So, I'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to focus. I had to decide what I was going to do. So I'm going to focus on some key points that I think are really critical to grant writing in general. All right. So I'm going to start with what I call 6 basic truths about grant writing. There's probably more, but these are what I came up with. You need a good idea. Okay. So if you don't have a good idea, it's going to be hard to get a grant. Okay. So let's get that out of the way. But you need to be a solid writer. You can have a great idea, but if you can't convey it, then it ain't going to happen. All right. And so, like these two are very critical. You have to be relentless. This is a tough game. All right. You're going to be knocked down repeatedly. All right. You got to get back up and get on the horse. Be relentless. Steel yourself for a career that's going to have some highs, but it's going to have some rejection here. And for those of us in biomedical science, right, that you need money to do research. So, lots on the line. There's a lot of stress involved, but gee, when you get it, let me tell you, it's a great feeling and it's a great privilege to be able to do research on something that you're interested in, right? It's amazing, actually. You have to have a history of productivity appropriate for your rank, right? Now, if you're a graduate student, you're not going to be expected to have a lot of papers. Postdoc, a few more papers, right? Assistant professor, even more. You need to show productivity. Like for an RO1, you're talking $2-3 million total costs. The government is not going to give you that money. And the study section is not going to be very happy with giving you that money if you're not productive, right? Because you could be brilliant, you could have great ideas, you could even, have done wonderful experiments, but if you can't get it out and publish, then it's worthless. You need some luck. There's just no doubt about it. In fact, these days you need a lot of luck, okay? But you can't control that, right? You can't control that. So forget about it. Just hope you have it. Control what you can control, and you'll feel a little better. And hopefully you'll be lucky. And you can't get a grant unless you write one. Okay. So, don't like twiddle your thumbs and procrastinate on it because, it's hard. All right. It's hard for everybody. But you got to just get up and do it. But that said, don't submit a half-baked proposal. That you always put your best foot forward. You submit a half-baked proposal, the study section starts to form an opinion about it. All right. And that memory could live on in, future versions and revisions of the grant. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about mechanism. But like I said, most of this you can get online. The first thing for really any NIH grant you need to do is read the parent announcement called PAs. These are funding opportunities, and there's different ones. This is the current one, I think, because they change. You got to check up on this all the time for an RO1 that doesn't involve human subjects. There's a different number for one that does involve human subjects, all right? And so you can click that. They have the slides.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you can read through it and it'll explain a lot of things. And like I said, they changed. So you gotta keep checking for that. Okay, I allow myself, and I've been at this a while, 2 months sometimes more than that. You need to allow yourself enough time to write it. It takes longer than you think, you know. You think, oh, it's just, I'll get this done in a couple weeks. No way. And there's so many different things that come up. Some of it is scientific, some of it's writing, some of it's administrative. You got to prepare yourself for that. All right. So leave yourself enough time. If you can, give it to senior colleagues in your area for feedback. But, you know, keep in mind, that's a lot of work when you ask your senior colleague to do it. So you're going to owe them a big favor later on in life. Okay. And be sure to follow all the instructions, because if you don't, they could actually send the grant back. Okay. What else here? Okay, you have to, I think you heard some of this in the prior talk. You got to submit your proposals through your department. Most departments here have you know, grants management staff that will help you. FSU Sponsor Research, I love those guys. I mean, they are really helpful. All right, so you have a question, call them up. There are certain individuals that are assigned to different departments, but the university requires 3 to 5 days before the deadline. My advice, make it 5 or more days, because if there's a problem, you need time to fix it. All right. Okay, once you do that, the grant gets submitted. It goes to what's called a study sections, grant review panel. There's about, well, let me say that only in this grant review panel, only about half the grant proposals for a given round are actually discussed. The other half are non-discussed, okay? And so you won't get a score. You'll get individual feedback from the reviewers, but it's not discussed among the panels. And that's a lot of grants, you know, and it's not so uncommon for your first submission to be in this category. So don't get demoralized by this, all right? Get back on the horse, right? Be relentless. So at NIH, the way it works, there's usually 3 reviewers. There's panels of about 20 to 30 reviewers. The discussion of a grant is only about 10 to 15 minutes, even if it's that much. And by the way, the longer it's discussed, the worse it is. It's not like, oh, we really like this grant, let's talk about it over and over again. They're coming up with criticisms, all right? The good ones get discussed really, really quickly. So, you know, that's not a lot of time. Right? That's why you need to be a good writer, right? And you need to get your point across to the reviewers. And okay, after all this, right, your score goes really quickly now. It's a couple of business days after the review. You can go online and you hold your breath and you know, you see what your score is. Now the summary statements with the actual reviews, they usually take about 6 to 8 weeks, all right? They're emailed to you. Again, this is NIH. And on those summary statements, you'll receive a priority score between 10 and 90, and this reflects the overall score of the voting in the study section. And for many mechanisms, you'll also receive a percentile score, including the R1. This reflects a percentage of proposals that scored better than yours in that study section for the most recent 3 rounds. They keep a running average, which is good. And once you get the summary statements, review them carefully, highlight every single criticism. By the way, it used to be that institutes had this automatic pay line, most did, so that, you know, if you were on the good side of that pay line, it was automatically paid. They've done away with that, at least for now. And so institutes are going to pop around and, you know, see which grants they're going to fund. I don't know how that's going to go. But anyhow, so you get your summary statements, review them carefully, highlight every single criticism, right? You have to do this. You have to know what you have to fix. By the way, when you get them, read them, and then get mad and put them down, leave it alone for a week. Just chill, all right? Because you're in a state of mind, you're so upset, you're not going to be able to deal with it. Trust me. But then you come back, you're a little more, you're calmer, you're more rational, and because you need to deal with it. And now would be a good time to call the program officer listed on the summary statement to find out anything that you can. Oftentimes, program officers are sitting in on these study sessions. Not allowed to say anything, but they usually have some advice to give you. All right. If you decide to resubmit, you're allowed a one-page introduction where you concisely summarize how you've addressed all the concerns. And you need to address every concern, not necessarily on that one page of stress, because sometimes there's so many, you just can't address them all. But the major ones, you got to get on that introduction. And but in the grant, you need to address all the concerns and don't get combative. Okay, even if you were right, and most of the times you'll think you were right, and some of the times you might have been right, you take the blame. All right, you say, I failed to articulate, and so we've changed this or whatever. All right, take the blame. Don't get combative. That never works. So I just want to give you a feeling for the typical timetable for an R01. So they have 3 submission dates. So there's let's see, February, and then there's June and October, and they're always on the 5th, at least for now. And so you submit it, gets assigned to a study section, it's reviewed June and July. You get summary statements back, let's say in August. In October, the Institute Advisory Council will meet and make a final decision on funding. November 5th, if you needed to resubmit, that would be the earliest you could resubmit. And for R01s, they give you an extra month. So, the first version of the grant would be October 5th, but this is a month later because it's a resubmission. And earliest you could get funded, if this did get funded, would be December 1st. So that's 10 months. Chances are you're not going to get funded on the first round. All right. So that means you're going to have to resubmit. Let's say you resubmitted on the 5th. That means that study section review of what's called the A1 occurs February and March. Get the summary statements, March and April, May, the Institute Advisory Council meets, and if you're fortunate, you get funded July 1st. That's 18 months from the very first submission. You got to think ahead. All right. That's a long time. So, you just have to sort of get into this rhythm, and, you don't want to write too many grants, but maybe have 2 in mind, that are staggered so that you always have a coal on the fire, but be careful. Don't spread yourself too thin. That's not good. Okay. Mind the study section. Keep in mind whom you're writing to. Find out who's on the study section. This is public information. It's critical. Be sure you cover all the bases for your research. And then based on what the study section composition is, cite their work if you can. They're going to notice that you didn't, if it was appropriate to cite it. And you could generally identify a 2 to 3 person pool from that roster that it's highly likely they'd be reviewers. So you got to convince them. They have to become your allies, and there's only a few grants they're going to be able to advocate for, and you just got to make it yours and make their job easy. It's like giving them evidence, evidence like they were an advocate in a legal case. Each reviewer gets 10 grants. They're reading these at night. They're on the weekends, and they're doing this over 5 weeks. It's really onerous. So, make yours stand out. Make it easy to understand and follow. All right, we're going to talk about how to do this. Here are the page limits for an R01. Actually, for several grants, a little confusing, but follow the page limits. I'll go over this very quickly in a minute. Let's talk scientific issues first, and then we're going to talk style issues, and then I'll be out of time, I think. So scientific issues. Okay, hypothesis testing versus descriptive research. So right or wrong, study sections like hypotheses. Personally, I think it's a little goofy. I don't think all science follows strictly hypotheses. I think a lot of it's serendipity, and I think some of it is exploratory, but not just, out of the blue exploratory. Nevertheless, they like hypotheses So even if you don't have true hypotheses, you can still frame virtually anything into a hypothesis. So my recommendation is do that, all right? And then you don't get that criticism. No, this isn't hypothesis-driven research. You got to pick a scientific problem that fits a more global view. It's not that your problem is going to be global, but you got to show them where this fits in. And so, you got to convince them you have a well-defined piece of a much larger, well-defined problem that gets back to having a good idea. Are your specific aims concise and clear? Feasibility. Can you perform the manipulations? If you can't, that's it. Can you get it done in the time frame proposed? If you can't, that's it. Do you possess the necessary facilities and resources? If you don't, that will be it. And this is also a fatal flaw. Is your proposal designed so that your first specific aim, if it doesn't turn out the way you think, then all the other aims can't be achieved. That's fatal. All right. So make sure your aims can be achieved independently of the outcomes of all the other aims. Okay, well, experimental, a lot of this is really just good basic science, right? So do you have a sufficient sample size? If you're using an animal model, is it appropriate? If you're doing human research, you've got the proper population, are your critical parametric choices, doses, concentrations, times, whatever, are they justified? Now you can't go on and on, you don't have enough space. You got to say something. You got to give them an idea. Where do these values come from? Why are they appropriate? Are the experimental designs quick and dirty? Hopefully not. Or are they comprehensively planned? Do you have sufficient control groups if appropriate? And did you explain your data analysis sufficiently? All that's really critical. Potential outcomes. This is a rookie mistake. This is why I see a lot of people who haven't had a lot of experience writing grants. They just kind of gloss over this. This is really important. You got to tell the study section what the potential outcomes are. That doesn't mean what you think will happen. That means what you think might happen, but also if it doesn't happen. You got to cover all the bases. And then you got to say what it will mean. That takes space, but it's worth it. Because when the reviewer reads that, that's when they really get an idea of the value of the grant, right? And if you can't convince them in this potential outcomes that these are interesting, yeah, it's going to be tough getting funded. Yeah. What else? Potential problems, so nothing ever goes as planned. We all know that, right? And so anticipate, you can't go on and on because again, you have to make choices. You only have so much space, but show them you're thinking about it, and think of what some of the complications might arise and then how you'll address them. And that shows, you're not naive. You're thinking about what might go wrong and you have a plan for it. Never try to hide or finesse a weakness. They will always find it. All right. And so if there's a weakness in the grant, you cover it. All right. Pull it out and address it outright. Okay. Otherwise, it looks like, you weren't sharp enough to realize that there were these weaknesses there. Did you demonstrate a reasonable command of the relevant literature? You can't write a review, but, you should have key citations in the text. Again, if you suspect a scientist is on the study section, they have relevant. Don't just cite them because they're on the study section. That will be disingenuous. But if they truly have something appropriate, be sure because they're going to notice that you didn't. And if there's a controversy, you're going to usually side with one part of that controversy, but present both sides. Be objective. Okay. And okay, so, I don't know how many years ago, NIH mandated that you need to address sex as a biological factor. And so you need to If you're only focusing on one section, you need to have a strong scientific justification for that. And it's usually good nowadays, because you see this in reviews all the time, to have a small section that's titled Sex as Biological Factor, where you address all this, all right? And if you're using both males and females, I mean, this assumes that type of research, employs males and females, but, address. Yeah, so they're really big on rigor and reproducibility. I don't know. Personally, I just have always viewed that, frankly, as a little silly, because, science should be rigorous and reproducible, and that should be totally obvious from your grant, right? From your experimental design and so forth. Like, just saying it's rigorous doesn't make it rigorous, but that's what's happening nowadays. So a lot of people are, telling the study section that their proposal is rigorous. I think it's a little bit of a waste of space, but you could sneak those words in there. If you want to read more about what NIH thinks about, rigor and reproducibility, you can click that link and look at it. We just don't have time to go through it. Finally, is the science exciting to you, right? If you're writing a grant and you're not turned on by it, forget it. I mean, how are you going to convince somebody else? You need to be excited about it. And over my career, I've started to write some grants and I was struggling, right? I just couldn't do it. I thought, man, I just don't know how to write or something. But the problem was that it really wasn't a great idea, and I wasn't into it, and so that was it. I didn't finish it. I went on and found something else. Okay, let's go over a few style issues. These are the last few slides, I promise. Be neat and organized. Use headers and subheaders. Really organized. Remember, these reviewers are reading all these grants are tired, they want to go to their kids' little league game and they have to read, grants, right? Break it up into logical subdivisions. Don't have these dense, long paragraphs with no white space at all, right? Because what happened, when I've been a reviewer and I open up a grant and I just see like this really dense, super long paragraphs, no space in between paragraphs. I mean, it's really demoralizing, right? So you don't need to, you think, I gotta say this, I gotta say that. Yeah, all right. But for the most part, if you take something out, you won't necessarily miss it. You just got to find a way to be clear and concise. It's not easy. Use tables and figures when appropriate. A picture is 1,000 words. I mean, figures can be really powerful. The nice thing about figures, you don't have font requirements, but you want to make sure they're legible. If even though, PDFs, you can enlarge them and everything, you don't want to annoy the reviewers. So make sure they're good figures. Well-organized tables can help. And like figures, the font requirements are relaxed. Okay, but again, you don't want super small fonts, going to make it hard to read. These tables are good for summarizing parameters of some technique, or good for listing potential outcomes to some extent. You still need text, but you could have, blood pressure arrows going up and, whatever measure you're making, arrows going down or whatever. This is a concise way to convey what the possible outcomes are and what it might mean. But be careful not to overuse figures and tables, especially if tables are overly complex, then it does the opposite. That can detract from the proposal. Use text boxes. I have found Word is very finicky if you just put the figure in. So just a little tip here is I make a text box and put the figure in the text box. It's easier to move around. You could use wrapping and you just make it clean. Make this a clean, professional looking document. All right. Writing style, I don't know, if you're familiar with Scientific American, it's like a popular science magazine. Usually, very well-established scientists, write to, the average person, what's going on. Do that style. Don't try to impress the study section with how smart you are and lots of jargon. Your idea is going to either survive or not. It's either a good idea or not. So just explain it and explain it in as clear a way as possible. Funnel the reader, start broad, and then methodically bring the reader down to your problem, right? Your question. Try to avoid jargon. Be sure to define abbreviations. Do not overuse abbreviations and acronyms. It is true they save space, and you probably should use them and can use them. But if you overuse them, that's annoying, and it will be confusing because reviewers can't remember all this stuff. Generally, redundancy is bad in writing, but actually in grants, it's an effective way to keep reminding the reader of important points. But that's to be balanced with how much space you need to do other things, right? Whoa, what did I do? Oh, okay. So for the R01, it's 12 pages for the research strategy plus 1 page for the specific aims. Different grants will have different page limits. You got to follow them. For an R01, well, the specific aims page is, 1 page. The research strategy is 12 pages, and you can break it up any way you want. This, I sort of recommend something like this, but it's not etched in stone. There's different styles. Okay. This is like sort of telling, it's not sort of, it should be telling the reviewer why it's an important problem. And this is how innovative it is, which, it's going to vary across grants. Some are going to be technically innovative, but others will be standard procedure. But that doesn't mean it's innovative. Every grant's innovative. You're asking a question that hasn't been asked before or answered before. And the approach is really critical. That's usually where all the criticism comes, is in the approach, and sometimes in the significance. Already said that. And again, the approach section doesn't necessarily have to be organized in this way. It could include all kinds of other information. Specific aims generally start with 1 to 3 paragraphs to provide some basic context. It's almost like a glorified abstract but then at some point you got to present the aims. These are like bold, numbered, separated by a line. Indenting's good if you have the space. If you're like, these aims should be 1 or 2 sentences. Another style would be to have the bolded sentence or 2 and then a paragraph following it. So there's different styles of this. There's not like one perfect way to write a grant, but there's a lot of ways not to write a grant, right? But as long as it's clear and organized, you can't go wrong. Significance, this is where you provide pertinent literature, stay focused, funnel the reader, start broad, systematically lead the reviewer to your question, like I said before. Remember, break it up, have bold headers, be careful that the text isn't too dense. Innovation, do the best you can in terms of highlighting what's new and novel about this, either conceptually or technically. The approach, best organized by aims and by experiments. If there are general methods that you're using in all the experiments that you're doing, you could put them up front in the general methods section. How am I doing on time? Almost out. Yeah, okay, I'm getting there. You need to be concise because you don't have much space, obviously. Provide the necessary detail. And what you could do, in terms of methods, you don't have a lot of space. You can refer the reader to a paper of yours. It should be yours, where you use the method that can provide a little more information. But don't do that too much, because you need to provide the critical detail for your reviewers to review the proposal. Be very clear about the experimental design. We already talked about potential outcomes and interpretations. We also talked about potential problems and contingencies for dealing with them. Yeah, back in the old days, people would put a projected timetable, but honestly, that eats up a lot of space. What I've been doing lately, in the last few grants that I've written over, I don't know, last 5, 6 years, is like for specific games in the approach, in parentheses, I'll just put, year 1 and 2. All right. So we'll have an idea when I'm going to do it. It's a very efficient way of providing that information instead of, using a table that just eats up a lot of space. It really doesn't provide a lot of information, in my opinion. Okay, so last slide, kiss of death. All right, this is what you want to avoid. Poor writing, mediocre idea, lack of feasibility, poor research design, flawed or missing interpretation of potential outcomes, poor facilities and resources, poor or modest productivity, one or more specific aims, depends on the specific outcome of another specific aim. That'll get you every time. And if you didn't include both sexes and you didn't provide justification, that also will be a red flag. And then a lack of critical detail. Okay? So don't do that. Okay. And be relentless. You just have to be, I can't stress this enough, steel yourself for some tough days ahead. But like I said, when you finally do hit, it is just the greatest feeling, so. And if I have time, I answer questions, but if I don't have any questions.
Questions for Dr. Spector? He's had a very long career of grant funding, and I think this will be the last year that they'll get to hear you. So,
Yep.
So, all
Bad
right,
enough.
ask your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for offering like so many good suggestions. So wondering what kind of ideas will be deemed as New York?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
bad ideas.
Yeah, I can't tell you that. I don't know, right? But I'll tell you this much. You better, I think, they're a mediocre idea. You just have to have conviction and confidence in your idea, right? It starts there. I can tell you that. So if you don't feel confident in your idea, it's going to be tough to convince somebody else. And but on the other hand, I told you could ask senior colleagues. I think it's really important for those of you, and I guess most of you or all of you are junior here, right? Don't seek out help, right? It's okay. Have people give you some advice. They could tell them your idea and see what, a couple of your senior colleagues. Yeah.
Based on your long experience in writing grants, what is like your advice to improve writing skills to the point of?
Yeah, it's really important, right? So writers aren't born, right? They're made. And when I was when I was in college, I was a terrible writer because I was a STEM, I took math, science courses, you didn't really write much. I took English and I liked it too, but obviously not enough. I think I started to develop writing skills when I was in graduate school. And I would give my academic advisor my, manuscripts and stuff. They come back full of red, but it was great, it was humbling, but at the same time, I was getting all this explicit feedback. So if you can get somebody to give you that explicit feedback, that's part one. Part two is don't ignore it, try to embrace it and, try to generalize it to the next paper. And that's what helped me through my career. I kept generalizing that feedback and trying to learn from people who were better writers, who were giving me very explicit feedback on all, not just science, but, grammar and, and just clarity, things like that. That's the best I can tell you. I mean, there is a reading and writing center here on campus, and probably some of those counselors could help you out too. Yeah.
Thanks for a very nice talk. Given that you have to plan 18 months ahead potentially because it takes so long to. But I guess when you start writing, a grant, most clearly what you're planning to do in the next few months based on what you've done before. And then the further and further away into the future you go, the less clear things are. So how do you deal with this sort of contradiction between the fact that, you're applying for a grant that will be given, 2 years away, but the things that you know best are the things that you're probably planning to do anyway in the next few months, regardless of when you start doing it, regardless of when you get a grant.
Yeah, I get it, but you're thinking maybe a little bit too detailed, like you got to pick a problem that you're pretty certain is not going to be solved in the next 2 years, right? And so the one thing that might happen is you're proposing a technique to approach the problem, and in the interim, there's some, amazing new technique that, evolves, but even if there's an amazing new technique that appears on the scene, it's not going to be completely accepted right away. So I think it's all in the choice of the idea that you have. Don't get so specific that somebody else. I mean, this can happen though. You could have an idea and then like 6 months later, somebody writes a paper and does aim one, right? There's nothing you can do about that. So, but you have to have a nose for Great. Thanks a lot, guys. Good luck. Keep relentless.
Following up on questions about writing well, I want to point out 3 resources. First, the Graduate Student Resource Center is hosting the Director Emeritus of the University of Chicago's writing program tomorrow in this same room at 4, right here, just like it looks right now. Talking about scholarly writing, the subtitle is meeting the demand for value. So going a little bit beyond just tips like how to write well and more how to actually make readers understand the value of what you've written, whether that's a grant application or an article or a chapter. So highly recommend that. There's a flyer for it here and on the sign-in table out there. It has a QR code. You can register for it there. Second, I will mention my office, the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards, on March 10th, doing a workshop on writing well, which is just going to have some sort of high-level tips for style and tone and best practices with fellowship and grant writing. It'll be on Zoom, 10 a.m. March 10th. Find it on the OGFA website, ogfa.fsu.edu. And third, since we were just talking about RO1s, I'll just mention for those of you in STEM, a really, really excellent book to get yourself is Writing Science in Plain English by Anne Green. Highly recommend it. Dr. Spector said to write in Scientific American style, and Anne Green will as well, and show you what that looks like, how to have clear verbs, clear nouns, like how to, everybody says to try to tell a story, right? But nobody really tells you what that means. It means to have recognizable actors and recognizable actions happening in your writing. So nouns that make sense and verbs that aren't passive and unclear. Anne Green does a lot of really great examples and shows you what bad writing versus good writing looks like. Highly recommend you get that book.
Okay, so we're gonna take a little break. Let's see, let's come back at 3 o'clock, okay? I'll tell you a couple of things before the break, reflecting on Dr. Spector's lecture. One of the things he said about figures, what I see in proposals now, especially fellowship proposals, on the specific aims page, sometimes the trainees will put in the graphical abstract that you design for a manuscript. That's become really popular. And it is a figure because people go back to the specific aims over and over and over. You get interrupted during the middle of the day and you've read half the proposal and then you go to the specific aims page. And you say, okay, what was I reading again? And then you have a figure right there. So that might be an idea if you like graphical abstracts. He also talked about subheaders and not writing big chains of fonts. And you got to remember that the people that are reviewing your manuscripts are my age. We can't read big blocks like that. You need a pause. You need a break. One of the things that I do is I make my subheaders a light. It's like a blue bold, and it just holds on the page really easy, and you can see that. So you have to make sure that your applications allow color, but most do. And that's a nice little trick. And then the other thing that he said about applications 50% being reviewed, you get, 3 reviewers, and those don't get scored, they don't get discussed by the panel at large. With all these closures that the government has had over, the last 3 months, what they did was they got backed up with 24,000 applications that they couldn't review. Okay. So what they did, my student just got her critiques back 2 nights ago. Instead, what they did, instead of reviewing half, they only reviewed 25%. And then that next 25%, they said, you're not discussed, but you might be available for funding, even though, because they just couldn't bring that many applications to the panel. So that's what they are doing when they get backed up. And I imagine that it won't be the first time that the government's going to be shut down in the next few years. Okay. So if you're not in that top 25%, if you're in the next 25% and it says not discussed, I don't think you can go, oh gosh, I got to rewrite, because you may be funded. Okay. I think that's it. So come on back at 3:00 and we will hear the humanities driven sectors here. We're going to hear the Spencer Dissertation Fellowships, Success for Humanities Proposals, and then Fulbrights and Newcomb and Melbourne.
Yeah, so I don't have enough right.
Oh, they're all on the back. Yeah.
I was
Yeah. I'll pull it up. Oh, you have the guard. Okay. Maybe tomorrow there's a zone out there to freeze that.
It's too.
Okay. Yeah, I don't make it like a foundation. Yeah, I mean, it's all it's less as well.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Right now.
I have to.
Okay. Let's say that's the overlay. This is. I was wondering if I could see like something I kind of want to ask. And I started looking at this process and like, yeah, I'll just start on it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I had one here. So, I mean, yeah. I found it embarrassed to be Yes. Yes, in between the library. Nice, yeah, you went. I was like, so much. That's awesome. Yeah, I really like, so I, the first one was I never was that. It's like, I'm not feeling with yeah, kind of stuff. It's like, you kind of hold like, yeah. What we did it seriously was kind of what we did, you know, fun if you do a big, like, I want to say it was a survey, like, kind of research or launch some big like interviews with like kind of the team of people like coming off. I'm not entirely sure exactly what I know. I just have my questions. I know my topics. Yes, I do. But I like that.
Yeah.
So you, that's gonna be super. Yeah, so. That's good. That's very good. I'm so, I mean, I think so you're going. Oh, okay.
Somebody, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, it's only. I think it's not. So I mean, last time I would have to once. It's still fun. I mean, some of the. I got it. I played and then I got it. And then I got it last year, and then I wanted to. I didn't want to do it. You post this out. But it's be on my own, really on my own. What about you? Because you bounce around a lot.
Yeah, I just, you know, I just go where I go.
Okay. Just grab your
Yes, it's best something to it is.
So
I mean, that's what I feel. Even if you want to be on TV, I'll go something else as well. I don't want to be. I mean, let's not be cracked out, but I'm not like close to that. Right now, I just know that it's supposed to be. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. A bird, that's not like I
So I just, the May is actually good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But where I went. Oh, okay. Yeah. But some of the whole sheet. It's really good. But I've never been on specific days.
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I would say the hardest part of getting a PhD is just getting your faculty.
I live on yeah, I mean, I have 10 minutes. I live in Allen City, so.
Okay.
And then I'm like 2 hours from Boston, which is like.
And then,
But, yeah, I mean, it's all, well, I don't know. I lived there 6 months.
I didn't appreciate when I was.
Yeah.
alright,
Just trying to enjoy.
Sorry, make sure it's just,
Take it.
yeah, the presenter with the notes or.
We can.
Just be able to find some notes.
yeah. So that remember which one that is?
Oh, it's been about which monitor. Oh, slideshow and. Yeah, I think it's usually the default. I can play it.
Okay. Yeah, that's not. Oh, I think, let me show this and then we'll move to yours and I'll move it off of.
Oh, right.
Yeah. You need the extended,
Well,
I think.
Yeah,
I think
but
we need to
I'm
expand
fine.
it, if not, yeah. Cause they were asking where the. Where the slides are.
Yeah,
It on the web, they're PDFs.
okay.
So, but you guys are setting it.
Oh, okay, yeah, but I wanted to ask. Actually. Because like.
No, so now we're connected. Yeah, I mean, I think that we have that in there, it's not times, we recommended, like, there are some things, the one we can talk about, what they did.
I was make sure how it was set up.
Yeah, exactly. The, like, no ACLS dissertation, foundation fellowship, but we want this, but we would that one is your first year of dissertation, so like, you basically have to apply it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not really.
Well, not necessarily, obviously.
Yeah, it'll just kind of depend on mechanism. There are some things that, you know, as they were saying, there's some things that like they want to fund you during the early part of it. So it's a one. So it kind of just depends what. Whether the mechanism.
Like presenter, but.
Yeah. Exactly.
So. Yeah, you're not ruled out. Yeah, you're all.
I'm going to retreat next week.
Yeah.
Wednesday, or was it all day? We're gonna just about the update of the proposal. Yeah, I'm trying to get it. Figure it out. Clear the call. Ways by the masters.
Remind me everything.
Talking about a certain thing and then your reviewer doesn't infers it. So I don't know.
I just.
I don't have one right now.
And she said that it's fine, just. You just have to find something that fits for your timeline, like say fellowship, you know, whichever grants.
Sounds like Cindy.
Which is definitely more limited. I'll try and do it.
What is it?
But.
About poets. I'm in this to us. But the program is like, this is like, you don't have to like, it's like, I've been to the beach, I have a beach just use. Yeah, yeah. Yes. Oh, if I was just, if I was just, yeah, that would be. Probably. You apply before you're in, and then you, it's like only your first. Sociology, it's a little different between base and thoughtful finance. There's not a lot of students who follow.
Because I don't know, I'm put on side. Yeah. Yes.
I was in psychology, American studies, my
That's
undergrad, and then I took sociology my senior year. And then kind of fell in love with that. I wanted to be there. So, yeah, sociology is hopefully. But I mean, yeah, all classes will be too.
What was that, sir?
I mean, I took a lot of. Like I took psychology of language, training psychology. I took some like science courses, not like neuroscience or anything, but they're not even. And then I've been very sick. So they were psychology and that is separate. So I just I don't know. I had a little bit of an interest in my life, so I just and I mean a lot of sociology dealing with like racialized capitalism, structural racism. So it's just not required.
We'll post it. You'll have to sign that. We'll post it.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
You'll be done by others who are writing.
I mean, psychology and sociology is connected in the sense that psychology is saying what's going on in this is making it fine. You know, how are you gonna say that? Sociology is saying from the society life and construction that creating like situations that people are behave in this way, act this way, how do people identify that we have to know every systems, institutions that you know, great organized society. And what is and I heard that a little bit. They were looking at how that affects their lives. Explaining emotional hopefully, I think you're a psychologist.
And then we move there. That could be,
Yeah.
That's what we're all like.
It's also like it's like they like you know that you're in the right place. And I thought so specific okay. And you met them before. Like when you applied, that's good.
So why you try to, when I
Some of you were asking where the slides are. And if you were a PhD student, you might have been looking on the OGFA and they're not posted there yet. But on the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs, if you go to, let me just pull this out of the way a little bit here. if you go to the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs and you go to events and workshops. And then you click upcoming events, then here's the event that is today. And then if you pull, and it has all of the dates that we had talked about on that last slide. And if you pull down to here, all of the talks are hyperlinked. So all of the talks that you're hearing today, you can just download those slides, okay? And then when we get the videos, we'll hyperlink it to the name. And then you can have the oration with it, okay? So if there's a lecture you want to see tomorrow, but your schedule is fixed, you can still do that, okay? All right, so I will move this guy out of the way. And then I need to change view, let's see. One, to do step. And then I think yours will show, Laura. Okay. No, I'm still not seeing that. Shoots.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, but I'm not seeing the split thing.
It's okay.
Thank you. Make sure this is fine. Or I can do passwords.
Sure, yeah, I will. And not my last.
There we go. Okay, so we got this set for you.
You two take.
And you can walk around and here's my phone. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I know a number of people in the room, but not everybody, but it's good to see you. Thank you for coming today and engaging in preparing your dissertation. Let me move that little, thank you. Your dissertation fellowships. I'm Lara Perez-Felkner, and I'm a 14-year faculty member at FSU. And I was a dissertation fellow with the Spencer Foundation. Now they partner with the National Academies of Education, and it's administered by the National Academies website, but still the same program that's existed for a long time. And I was also an ARA research grantee, and I'm now on the governing board for the ARA grants program that oversees one of the dissertation grants, the large scale NSF, more STEM education focused dissertation grant, and then also the post PhD research grants as well. And I will be at an all-day retreat for that next week. And so I am happy to answer questions about that now and later. I will never be a reviewer of FSU proposals for conflicts of interest reasons, but I'm happy to give general information now and future. I'm also a faculty fellow recently in the graduate school, which is great fun. Wow.
Click on it.
Too fast. Okay. But it says work. Okay. So I'm going to go on this angle just to see. I know how many folks are interested in education proposals versus being in the room for other reasons, just to, okay, thank you. I knew folks on this side, but I want to make sure to make eye contact with everybody. And there are a number of, you don't have to be. And often folks who get these awards, especially in Spencer, are not people who are in an education discipline. I was not either, even though I'm in an education department now. They regularly fund, as long as the topic is related to education, that is something that is valuable to them. There are a number of other related type fellowships that we won't talk about today in the interest of time, like the WT Grant Foundation does a lot, often a little bit later. We're looking at the studies of youth, so children and youth up to age 25. There are lots of agencies that are private as well as government agencies. And so ARA and Spencer are the two that we're going to focus on. And it's important to think about what the stages are. The two that I'm talking about today are dissertation stage fellowships, but you don't need to be at the late stages of things to be thinking about these. I definitely encourage them earlier. In fact, our program, where I'm a faculty member of the higher education program, recently made a change in its prelim structure to help align people to be engaging in the kind of writing that would help get them ready to be eligible for these fellowships at the right time. So the Spencer Foundation, for example, has its solicitation close for dissertation fellowships that are meant for your last write-up year of study. It closes in early October each fall, and it takes a whole year to be determined. And so ideally, you're thinking about what you want to do, you've been meeting with your committee, you've been getting feedback on your dissertation ideas and what kinds of data you would collect or analyze that already exists, what this would work on, having a strong sense of methodology, which matters to both of these and many other grants in education and the social sciences generally, and be preparing that idea and statement of purpose and be getting lots of feedback and opportunities like these when you're a year and a half or more out from the dissertation. Spencer and AERA both let you resubmit if you submit and then don't get funded in that first cycle. You can resubmit a second time and get it. But it is a great opportunity to be crafting your idea early. I think it's a good use of your time, irrespective of what the outcome might be. And we'd also love to get more people winning these awards. We've been having people win the awards. For Spencer, we only have one, to my knowledge, so far. It happens to me and my former PhD student, Samantha Nix, who's still working here and still working with data. But I know the funders are interested in having more Florida State people be winners. And so happy to talk with you about that. There are some milestone grants that might be available for you also at an earlier stage at the pre-doctoral level, whether that's from the National Science Foundation, specific professional associations like in higher education, we have ACPA, College Personnel Association, NASPA, things that might be specific in your discipline. If you're history or sociology of education person or philosophy, there are other things that you can do to help give you that early stage feedback in addition to people in your discipline, to be submitting to conferences and trying to craft that and be applying for scholarships to get that kind of seed of an idea going. That's also relevant thinking about your career pathway beyond the PhD or other doctorate that you might be pursuing, to be thinking about what is like a small seed grant that can help give you the idea germination stage funded, and then be able to scale it up to something that's a little bit more large term. These hyperlinks all worked when I was testing them over the weekend. And hopefully that is still true today. It should be. This is an oldie but goodie statement, The Art of Writing Research Proposals by the Social Science Research Council. I remember seeing a version of this way back when I was in graduate school, which was a while ago, and we still actually also include this with our prelim exam of how to think about the art of writing a proposal. The Spencer Foundation also has its own documents. They just recently re-updated their website, but they also have documents around how to think about what they call field-initiated proposals, how to think about an idea that's coming from your read of the literature, coming from a puzzle or a problem of practice that you're thinking about. With Spencer, they are a little bit more of kind of they really see themselves as dealing with scholars. They might feel a little bit more elite. They've got more Spencer, like Stanford and Harvard and U Chicago people in that group. That I would love to see more of us mix in to that group, but they really love seeing like the basis in theory and having the theory be aligning with the methods and thinking about how this dissertation, like thinking big, how this is going to shape the field. So thinking practically is absolutely still appreciated, thinking about policy, thinking about specific issues, but also what does the field learn from this that could be scaled and taken up when they're giving their 30 dissertation awards per year. So feel free to think about things ambitiously. AERA also thinks about things in that kind of big, ambitious term, but they also are sometimes a little bit closer to educational problems of practice, areas around methodology. And so who may be thinking about these at different stages. The large-scale dissertation grants that are the ones that I see and review and touch the most tend to be more focused on often state and national longitudinal databases, things that are publicly available, that are accessible. Also thinking about that idea of scale. If they're funding you to do this work, can you make your code available? Can you be publishing in big journals? Can you be using something that can inspire other people to do work with these data that often are heavily invested in by the federal government as well as these private foundations. And they want to see it possible for more people to use and leverage these very robust data sets. The ARA minority grant and that is also a fall submission right now. It used to be more in the spring. Another reason to think about these things early. And other foundation grants also may have a range of deadlines to be much more open on methodologies. Spencer is super open on methodologies, but also on like ambition and transformation as well. There are postdocs and early career awards that you also tend to be better positioned to get if you've had these. So another motivation to at least learn the crafts of writing these early. And Spencer postdocs are really great resources, and those are for people who are in faculty roles or research scientist roles, some other stage, and they're early towards mid-career, sometimes getting ready for tenure, and you're only eligible for those if you've been a finalist or winner of the Spencer Dissertation Awards, which technically are called the NAED for National Academies of Education / Spencer, but historically have just been Spencer. So good practice for thinking about these. There are other small grant programs and research grants as well that are more specific that you can find on their website if at various points in time you want to know more about these. And another thing to consider at this kind of earlier stage is talking with your committee members, talking with your advisors around what data they may have available that you can start working with now and getting to know, start writing an early stage paper, collaborate, be what they used to call, I was at the University of Chicago and they would call it like an up-under paper. You may be third or fourth author, but you got to see the process. You got to see just how the things work. You get to play with the code a little bit and be familiar with and be in meetings with people talking about the nuances of those data. And that is really helpful as people are reviewing your CVs as they do in these. They want to see your idea, but they're also investing in you as a scholar and want to know how you're positioned to be able to stay in the field. They may have essays that are asking you about your why you want to be in this field, what you want to do next, and answering genuinely and transparently and in a way that fits with your profile so far is helpful in conveying to them that this is not just a really great idea, but this is an idea that they'll fund for this period of time that you've asked and written a budget for, but then also ideally is something that you'll be able to carry with you over time and mentor your own students and trainees on. FSU has great examples of funded grants in their database. This is searchable by date. You can find the names of people and what they've been doing since then. If you have any additional questions about trying to find people, there are often social networks posted around people to find who've gotten these awards recently. The websites for each of these awards also list the recent winners, who may be people that you see at conferences, maybe people that you know in other ways. And folks, especially if they've started to publish on and share their ideas. But even before that, folks tend to be very happy to share their process, talk with you about it, potentially. And if they say no, it's usually just an intellectual property thing if they're like in the middle of getting that idea over the finish line. And so they may not share their exact proposal with you, or like post it online, but they may be very happy to talk with you about process and maybe sit with you on Zoom or coffee or in person to show you what that looks like. There also are really great webinars and resources for these specific grants and others, which I strongly encourage you. I think you've been hearing the same ideas from others for the other scholarships and fellowships today, but just really encourage you to do that, including if there are changes year to year, like AERA is now under a new funding line. So things expire, they run for the federal government. National Science Foundation specifically funds the AERA dissertation and research grants. It expires every 3 or 5 years and has to go through renewal. And then this new cycle has some slight tweaks associated with it. Like now there's additional attention as one of the options to write about AI and computational pathways in science in addition to STEM more broadly, some other kinds of tweaks like that. So staying current and up to date about whatever it is that might be changing in their organization is helpful, including any structural pieces. Like one of the things that we're talking about next week at AERA before we post the updated call and new solicitation that I think will be available for people to start applying for in May, or the closing in May, and trying to send award notices so that you can start spending on that this fall, knowing that a lot of people lost funding and need funding, and trying to be as quick as possible. We're trying to add a rubric that we've been working on, and just a tighter call for proposals and making sure that that's available. If you don't see something like that available for this or other things that you may be applying for, feel free to reach out to the person who's the contact. They take phone calls, they take emails, try again if they don't respond right away, but they want to see high volumes of really great proposals, and they're happy to answer questions that might help you have stronger proposals that makes everyone feel good and happy and keep investing in this process. You definitely need for these letters of support. For Spencer, there are also very specific things that your writer has to speak to about your readiness to complete the dissertation, how they see it as transformational. ARA, this is true as well. Those letters end up being really valuable. I can share from being on review committees. It is really great to be able to have the letter and the proposal feel like they're about the same person and about the same project. And that is harder to do if you're doing something towards the end. So reaching out early, having them prepare early to be able to answer the questions that are prompts for them about what they're writing can help you also get more directed feedback on things that can help make your proposal stronger. Sometimes we'll see the letters describe the proposal in a clearer and stronger way than the proposal itself was doing, which is also that, like, many of you are really humble and don't want to oversell your idea. And then some of the people at other places or their letter writers will speak very boldly about what you're doing. And there's truth in the middle there, but be very assertive and clear about what it is you're doing, how it's valuable to the field. Spencer uses a rubric, especially for some of its post-PhD solicitations, especially for thinking about like career or moving to mid-career awards, where they say something like, before you came along, before your dissertation project, people thought this, like people thought X about the field. And as a result of this project or as a result of this person's work, they're positioned to think Y. Like there's this gap, puzzle, misunderstanding, longstanding issue that we have been able to figure out. And this is how you're going to move the needle. So this is a time to be ambitious and clear about what you're doing, and make sure that the people who are writing support letters for you understand what that is. You can sometimes revise and resubmit and get feedback for these particular fellowship proposals at this point in time. You tend to not get feedback, at least unless you're at a finalist level or there's some particular kind of little tweaky thing that they're asking you to make before they can officially sign yes. Like a reviewer was concerned about this aspect of your methodology or something that wasn't clear in your budget proposal. They need you to revise this. And if you can do it and you have 2 weeks or a month, then you can move to the next stage. So be checking messages, be getting early feedback, and get people to commit and not be stressing them out, asking at the last minute. There are some general suggestions that are here. I do encourage for ARA, it's George Wimberly. I don't remember off the top of my head, who I've known for 20 or 25 years. I don't remember right now who the program officer contact is for the Spencer NAED grant, but it is clearly listed, and they do, again, offer opportunities for comments. They have live webinars that make these available, and these are their field-initiated research grant proposals I mentioned before. Here are some additional ones too. This is the most recent version of the link for ARA preparation. I strongly encourage people who know me, have been in my classes, or are my own advisees in the room, know I really love using tools and outlines and whatever is there to help you organize your proposal. This is especially true more generally for if you are writing a dissertation that is 160 or 250 or any long amount of pages. You can get lost in the weeds. Even if you're just writing a dissertation grant that's much shorter, you can still get lost in those weeds around and change things and then not remember to go and change them back. There's a key part of your variable that you decided to swap out, but you're still referring to the old version of it earlier, and then your lit review is justifying that old decision. So like the built-in word style guide is really great at helping you make an interactive outline and also have clear headers. So when people are reading, they know this is the main idea, this is the next level idea. They may, for example, ARA has very clear variable lists available to them that you have to be very specific about and show understanding that what you want to know is possible and also that what you want to know is available and in the years that you want to look at it. There may be changes year to year. So this is another like start early, think about this, try to test this and find out. There are some fun things that you'll hear too if you do the webinars and learn that you either can or can't have an appendix and what the nature of that appendix can be. So that can be really helpful. I applied to Spencer twice. I was in like an in-flight program where you do a master's and PhD at the same time. And so I had a little bit more time and I applied early and I didn't get it. I got some feedback and I applied the second time and I got it. And the appendix was very helpful. And then I coached other people to use an appendix to have other methodological detail. That's not always allowable, but I think work with whatever is allowable to tell your story. You can overdo it and give too much information, but at a minimum, make sure that you are giving them the information that you have to give them and are being judged on, especially if it's connected to a rubric or any like bolded subheaders of what they want to know and understand. And if you know what your recommendation letter writers are being asked to report on, like for Spencer, for sure, their readiness for you to do this and complete the dissertation on time, the way that this is going to transform the field, that's something that you should also try to work into your own narrative as well and explain that story. So yeah, you don't want to get kicked back for things like page limit, word counts being off, missing a section, not having an essay, or you're trying to submit 10 minutes before the deadline and the website crashes. Just the best that you can to try to get everything done early. It's always a good thing to try to do that. This is something that our really wonderful grants editor helped put together for us as well around plain language. So the reviewer base for these is varied. For AERA, it is mostly us educational researchers and those who look at large scale data, at least for the large scale grants. So people who use national data sets, state data sets, who kind of think deeply about certain questions. They'll have psychometricians, econometricians, sociologists of education, trying to cover a range of things. In the past, we haven't had people outside of the committee review. We are tentatively, unofficially, likely moving forward, trying to get a little bit more expertise. This is a goal. It may not happen by this round, but we're trying to have some additional ad hoc reviewers that are like an editorial board for this group, which is actually similar to how Spencer works and partnering with the National Academies of Education. All of the National Academies of Education people, and you can go to the website and see who's in the National Academies. They are going to be reviewing proposals. They'll do, as my understanding, like a good job of trying to match. You can't predict exactly the concentration of who's coming in terms of proposal topics and then conflicts of interest that are being managed, but they'll try to match people who have decent expertise in that area with each proposal, try to make sure that at least one person reviewing has strong expertise in that area, but you'll also have some generalists be looking, like you'll have a historian looking at a sociology one, someone who has a more economic background, looking at something that might be about finances, but is looking at it in a very qualitative way or in a different way than they traditionally write. So make sure that you're using plain language, that this is accessible to people who are reading it. Generally speaking, there'll be a lot of technical pieces, so maybe not in your methodology section, but in the overall rationale for your project and the contributions, that should be readable and understandable by someone who is an undergraduate, who like can understand how to read at a high enough level, but doesn't need the technical expertise to understand the purpose of this, especially for things like ARE that are paid for out of taxpayer dollars. The like rationale for what you're doing is really important. So some guidance here around plain language, and just remember as you're writing, that same idea too, of like, don't undersell your project, don't undersell your expertise and why it's important to invest in this particular project. And also you as someone who's an expert in this area and can contribute during the dissertation stage and beyond. You're an expert in this area. There's a lot that's in your head. This is true also at the writing your dissertation and presenting it stage of sometimes the things that are in your head don't make it onto the paper. And so make sure as you're reading and reviewing that you don't forget the hook or like bury the lead using a general journalism idea of like, why does this matter? And really making a strong case for yourself as a scholar who's being funded as a fellow, irrespective of what line or discipline you're working in, as well as for this particular thing. Know that gaps that are just gaps don't matter unless other people care about them. And sometimes you need to make a case that you're doing something. There may be a really emerging literature like AI, for example. I'm a journal editor, and most of the papers I read about AI are they're written completely by AI and don't make great sense once you actually look at them, or they don't have good data. They're not good. So you're just not seeing, right? Something that's really new, or like COVID, the first wave of COVID papers were not very strong because the base of evidence was not there yet. So if you're working in an area that's really new, you can still make a good case for why it matters, and maybe bring in literature about another topic, another issue that can help explain why understanding this thing is also going to be a game changer, and here's why, but then still remember to be a scholar while you're talking about the literature and making this case. If you're writing in an area that a lot of people really care about and are writing about right now, make sure to make clear your particular lens, your particular contribution, and you may have an easier time justifying that, school attendance matters. It's mattered for a long time. And now after COVID, because of other challenges, transportation issues, school funding, more and more like the norms and the actual practices in schools mean that a lot of students are falling behind in terms of attendance. And it's a new case of a phenomenon. Here's why it matters. Here are the stakes. And here's how I'm positioned to understand it because of these reasons. And these folks that I'm citing, if you have mentors, there are sometimes cases, and hopefully you all have mentors, but in some cases you have room to talk about your resources. Sometimes it's a little bit vague, but there tends to be in both of these a place where you can specify what your resources are on your campus. Who are people who can mentor you on this? Do you already have a dedicated access to this data? Do you have someone who you can work with who can coach you on what you're doing, and kind of an advisory board of sorts that you can speak to, even if they don't get any budget? But know that you can make the case for this and read your work and showcase your motivation confidently. That's it for my slides, and I'm happy to take questions. I didn't always speak exactly to the slides, but those are the main things. Thanks.
Let Dr. Buckner answer questions while I switch out. Okay.
You mentioned underselling yourself. Can you oversell yourself?
I think it's like anything that you'd be writing about here of show evidence. So I think as long as you are making it right, like think about all the things in your CV that may not be there, but that might matter. They're often a very abbreviated CVs. So at AURE, I think you've got 2 pages. So think about what is making a case for how you are positioned to know this thing. Try to be working on publications, presentations, showing your kind of readiness to think through complex challenges. There's a space too for AURA, and I think also for Spencer. I just haven't reviewed one in a while to see, to show your course preparation, any specialized training that you may have had. You went to a deeper workshop on something, you have field experience. If you're doing something that is international, for example, you've spent time in this country, you've done something at this area, you were a practitioner in the field before. It's going to vary depending on what you want to know, but I think show your work, like show your evidence in there, but I don't think that this is a time to be humble. In my experience is that you can definitely be under humble, but as long as you're making a case for why your topic matters and justifying it, and also showing why you're well positioned to do this, and coaching your letter writers to make sure that they're also making that case for you, and understand the way that they're like, let them talk about why they think it's worth their time to write a letter for you, why they think you're great, why they think you should apply for this. Or if you're at an earlier stage and you're just thinking about this, or you have some doubts, like ask them what they think, ask early, ask whenever you're writing and able to do so. What are the things that they think will help you be better positioned to do this? And that can be like a more humble entry into understanding this. Like, what would a good person look like to you who'd be positioned to do this? Can you help me decide what's in my CV that's not there, or what things are maybe distracting or extraneous versus other things that can help tell my story better and make the case that I'm worth investing in. This project is worth investing in. Yeah. Yes, both of these do. Not every fellowship does, but these do. NSF is the National Science Foundation funds the AURA grant, and they sometimes have certain restrictions for some fellowships. But we've been supporting international students the whole time for the large scale grants. And Spencer is very open as well. So you'll see a range of topics. You'll see a range of folks. There is some attention to, even though it'll still happen, my year that we got Spencer, we had an overabundance of historians. It just happened that year. There wasn't any particular reason, but there were like 2 history tables out of our 30, round tables of 8. And then there were fewer people who were in econometrics type spaces. There'll be some variation of like, if we just have international projects, or we just have like people from Wisconsin or something, let's look again to see what's happening as they're looking at the kind of narrowing down the finalists to make sure that there's good variation of topics that are being covered. But it could be that this is just a really key year for another ARA proposal set that I was reviewing for a different solicitation. There was a year that civics education was this huge, it was 2016 or so 2017. So maybe there were some reasons on that end, but it just really popped that year. And it was not traditionally something that we saw a lot of great proposals on. And I think we were mindful of, if we're getting, maybe not all of these are great, but it seems like it's a year to fund something good. Let's see if we can take another look maybe at trying to find like a really good one from here to pay attention to. And cover. So there's a lot of nuance that happens on these panels, but they're trying to reflect the field and the topics that matter at that time. And international topics and international scholars are definitely a part of that.
R01 indicated an 18-month journey from call for proposals. How long do we look at?
So for AURA, it's pretty quick. So it's a little late to be posting this next one. We had a new board, a new PI, a new call. And so I believe that this new one will be posting in May, and they're looking to get funding decisions to people in time for them to be able to use it in fall for August starts. So this last round we had an overabundance of proposals, but we also funded a bit more than normal too. So having had the experience of NSF canceling lots of grants, we're not trying to save for a rainy day. We're trying to fund at an appropriate level for something that's fundable, but make sure to award students. And so I think the proposals were due in November, and the holidays got in the way, but funding decisions were released sometime in January. To be able to use them quickly. Spencer is really long. That's true for their later proposals too. So they ask for proposals for early October, and then you tend to get notified. It's around our professional conference cycle, but you tend to get notified in early to mid-April. You'll know stages. ARA is just you get it, you don't get it. There may be a very tweaky kind of revise this little thing, and then you're on a path to getting it. If you're able to address that issue, which I've talked about a couple of times, but it's still pretty rare. You usually just get a clean yes or no. For ARA, because it's so long, they have lots of people look at it and they feel very special. They have very fancy parties. Once you get it, you're in it for life. And you go, they give you like mashed potatoes and like cocktail glasses with like sushi on top. Why? But so they will tell you if you have moved on to semifinalist stage by early spring, and then if you moved up to the finalist stage. And so you'll know if you're in the potentially funded group or not, but you don't get feedback until later. So I would still think diversify your options in terms of funding, keep conversations alive with folks here, look at internal awards, look at other fellowships too. These are particularly prestigious. Spencer, for example, informally for a long time, it's been like equivalent to a journal article in terms of publication. Again, it's a network for life. You do get networking benefits from these. You get invited to special conferences. You get invited to special receptions. Spencer, because they have more money for life. ARA, for the most part, like within a certain window. But they do tend to want to keep you in the family. So if you get a Spencer at one or ARA at some point, you tend to be better positioned to get them at a later place. So yeah, ARA will tell you quickly, and we're looking to have 3 cycles per year of the large scale grants, which does limit the kinds of ways that you can ask your questions, but not necessarily the questions that you can ask or the framings of it, just something that is kind of about educational methodology, something that is using primarily quantitative methodology to answer questions that are mostly about STEM, but not exclusively about STEM. And that's all specified in the call for proposals. And then Spencer tends to be really open, but they do end up winnowing at various points.
Hold the other questions. Yes. All right, so our next speaker is from the history department. So NASA.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about grants and maybe answer any questions that you have. So, this is what I'll talk about. This is an image of the book that I published in 2022 about domestic service in Cuba. I'm a historian of the Caribbean, but specifically of Cuba. So I'll talk a little bit about my credentials, why you should listen to me as far as best practices for grants. And then I'll give you, I think, kind of like 4 big ideas that I think are key to success in getting grants and receiving grants. Tell a story, explain the stakes, make feasibility clear, and follow instructions. And a lot of this is embedded in a lot of the guides that Professor Perez-Wagner talked about that you've seen before. Okay, there we go. So these are the major fellowships that I've received when I was in grad school and since I've been here at FSU. So the bottom 3 are ones that I received for my first book, and then the top 2 are for my second research project. One thing I want to make clear is that I received some pretty major fellowships, but I didn't receive far more fellowships than I got. So when I received the Ford Foundation Dissertation Fellowship, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, I didn't receive the SSRC International Dissertation Research Fellowship or the Council on Library Information Resources. When I got the WW Dissertation Fellowship, that used to stand for Woodrow Wilson, I did not receive the American Association of University Women Fellowship or the Mellon Dissertation Fellowship or the Harvard Academy of Scholars Fellowship. And when I received the McKnight and the Schomburg Center fellowships, I didn't receive also the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship for Early Career Scholars or the ACLS Fellowship for Early Career Scholars. My point here, of course, is to cast a really wide net, to apply for a lot of fellowships, because just statistically, you're not going to get most of the ones you apply for. And it can be difficult to not take rejection personally. But it's really, I would say, a numbers game as far as applying to these fellowships. So that was my secret first piece of advice. Now we'll get into my actual pieces of advice. So this is an excerpt from my proposals for my second book project, which is about Cuban veterans of independence wars in Africa. So what I'm doing here is telling a story, right? And something that Professor Pettis Faulkner mentioned a couple of times is historians who receive, for example, education fellowships. I think she said towards the end of her talk, or based on a question, that there was a year in which a majority of the Spencer Fellows were historians. And I think that's because historians tell stories, which may seem obvious, right? But creating a narrative is a very useful way to kind of get people reviewing your fellowship on your side. Everyone can understand a story. Not everyone can understand off the bat, complicated data that you might be using, right? But if you can turn it into a story, at least initially, that can hook people in. I remember when I was in grad school, one of my advisors, she was on the committee to review SSRC fellowships. And she said that they actually kind of created an affirmative action system for non-historians, because just reading the proposals blind, they were giving all of the fellowships to historians. And other professors intervened and were like, this isn't fair. We can't just fund historians. And so they created this affirmative action program for people who weren't historians. So it goes to show you, maybe take a lesson from historians, try to tell a story, even if that's not particularly your discipline. Okay, explain the stakes. Dr. Pettis Faulkner also pointed to this. I was going to say exactly what she said, which is it's not enough to say, no one has ever researched this before. No one has ever written about this before, because the immediate response you might get from that, from maybe a surly reviewer, is maybe no one's written about this before because it doesn't matter. So it's not enough to say that it hasn't been done before. You have to explain why it matters. So here in this little snippet I posted, this is kind of a historiographical argument, right? I'm saying that this matters because the way that we understand Cuban intervention in these wars changes the way we understand Cuban revolutionary history, a topic that I think has been understudied, right? But I could have gone even further with my kind of explaining the stakes here. I wrote this about 6 years ago. I got these fellowships in 2021, but I'll be writing fellowship applications in the fall to finish this book project. And I will certainly be going further in terms of explaining the stakes of my project, because if you are not a Cuba follower, you might not know that Cuba is in the worst crisis it's been in since the 1990s right now. So I will be emphasizing that in my fellowship proposals, that our failure to understand this era that I'm writing about can contribute to our failure to understand the precise moment that Cuba is living through. So make feasibility clear. Sometimes fellowship applications pull this out specifically and ask you for a budget, ask you for your timeline, etc. Sometimes they don't. And when they don't, I would say you absolutely need to answer these questions, even if they're not explicitly being asked. Sometimes I think we can overlook how prosaic some of the concerns of the reviewers of these grant applications are. By that, I mean, a fundamental concern is, if we give you this money, will you do with it what you say you're going to do? I think a lot of committees or grant organizations, their worst nightmare is giving someone a lot of money to complete a project that they fail to complete, right? That's kind of embarrassing for them. They want you to be successful, to finish your project so they can brag and say, look at all the great work that's produced by our foundation. So you want to make clear that you can do what you say you're going to do through all kinds of, things that you can point out. Have you been to the archives before that you're proposing to go to? Are you familiar with them? Meaning like, can you get to these archives and really find what you need? Have you completed, or if you're applying for writing fellowships, can you make clear that you've actually completed all the research you need to do and you will be writing the entire time that you have this writing fellowship? The reviewers might be concerned if they sense there's kind of a gap in your research or there's still more research to be done. Can you make clear that it's done, that you can spend the whole time writing as the fellowship demands? Are you fluent in the right languages? If you're looking for an international grant, if they, drop you off in Colombia or in Cuba, can you actually do anything there? Will you be successful because you know the language, because you know the country? If there are those kinds of, if there's space to answer those questions, then you should answer them. And then finally, Dr. Perez-Faulkner pointed to this as well. Follow instructions. This might seem really obvious, but a lot of people fail to do it. And I think it's really important. This is a screenshot from the ACLS, the American Council of Learned Societies, I think early career fellowship. And you'll see these are the application guidelines, and I highlighted kind of sloppily every place where they mention Arial or Helvetica 11-point font. They're very clear that they want Arial or Helvetica 11-point. No idea why. I don't know. I don't particularly like either of those fonts, but they do. And so this is something that would be easy to overlook, right? Like if you have a preferred font or just like an immediate one that's on your word processor, you might just be typing away trying to get stuff done, and you just submit in Times New Roman or Calibri or whatever, right? But this fellowship, which offers a lot of money, there's a corresponding dissertation fellowship. I realize that you guys aren't professors. This is a lot of money, and you potentially could lose out on that money because you don't follow kind of minuscule, seemingly unimportant instructions like these. I'm not trying to justify this. I'm not saying there's actually a secret, really important reason why they want this. There is accessibility. So you see, I feel like they should put that on there, but they don't. And so my point stands, right? Anytime there's an opportunity to kind of like fulfill a seemingly minor detail requirement, you should do it. Because again, as I've heard people have been pointing to all day, lots of people are applying for these fellowships. And so sometimes what reviewers are looking for is a way to eliminate you so that they don't have to read as many things. We've all been, part of situations where we have to read a lot of stuff. And it's like, okay, how do I narrow this down? How do I only look at what I really need to look at? One way to do that, unfortunately, when you're reviewing grant applications, is to say, okay, who didn't follow directions? Can any of us be disqualified because they just didn't do what we were asking them to do? You don't want the answer to be yes for your application. You want it to get to the stage where they're actually reading your work, deeply engaging with it, and deciding based on that whether to give you a whole bunch of money to continue your research. So that is my last slide. So thank you, and happy to take any questions. Yeah.
So, I mean, I know it's like a recurring theme, just with applying for scholarships and like fellowships specifically, like not exactly grants, right? It's like one of the reasons why they ask that question, why should we pick you? It's like, how do you answer that question beyond just being able to like need money?
That's fair. I think the way to answer that question is, I really think it's through the stakes question. Like, why does your research matter? Arguably more than anyone else's research, or why does your research matter? They should pick you because what you're going to tell them has broad implications for your field, and therefore will help whatever grant giving organization is gain prestige. Like your work will make them be prestigious because they will have funded such an important project.
So draw it back to the project.
Yes, definitely. I would say specifically maybe, when they ask you why should we pick you, they're not asking how much you need it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think they care that much. Unfortunately, they're assuming everyone needs it, right? But they want to know, why is your research special?
Yeah. Thank you.
So Spencer's was the first one to mention a rubric. In the fellowships that you applied for, did you notice a rubric, or was it involved in that process?
Yeah, so there were not rubrics in the same kind of formal sense that it seems like there are for more social sciences fellowships. But like the screenshot I did for the ACLS one, there were a lot of things like that where it was just like bullet points of certain instructions. And sometimes, like I said, the Schomburg Fellowship was like a residential fellowship at the New York Public Library. I think the only thing I submitted was a proposal, just like one Word document of a proposal. And they included some things about what to put in that proposal, but that was it. But then for other ones, there were like, 10 separate documents, like the proposal for the project, the budget, the timeline, all of those were separate documents. So I would say for humanities scholarships, it's a little more kind of scattershot what they require. There's not necessarily a sort of kind of sophisticated kind of guideline about what you need.
A question for you, Vanessa. So how, if you're not familiar with the network of funding foundations and these special programs, how would trainees find these things? Because you apply to so many different kinds of things. How, is there like a database? Is it in Pivot, or how do you find out?
That is a very good question. So FSU itself has a really good database of fellowships, I think both for graduate students and for faculty. The main way I knew about what scholarships or fellowships to apply for in graduate school was my professors basically making clear which fellowships most people in our program apply for. So for the SSRC, IDRF, we were basically kind of forced to apply for that. It was expected that we would, just everyone told us to. Outside of that, I would suggest pretty much talking to your peers, talking to people a couple of years ahead of you in your program, seeing what grants they've received, maybe even talking to your advisors about what grants they received when they were in graduate school. It's constantly changing, right? And it's always been changing, the landscape of granting organizations, but even more so now, right? In 2026, the landscape is even more volatile than it has been. So it can change from year to year. But I would really say like talking to people who are kind of within a few years of where you are in your career is really helpful for finding those grants.
That's also why my office exists.
Yes.
I don't know how relevant this question would be. Those are your fellowships, those are like writing fellowships, right? Or
yes, I think.
Right slide.
Yeah, I think.
Like developing something into a book or something.
So the fellowships I got for my second project, the Schomburg one in particular, that was a research fellowship. But the other ones were writing fellowships.
And there was a question about like writing fellowships. I'm a postdoc. I've been eyeing some within my field about developing writing a book. So what are like the logistics of how that interacts with like your current position? So right, because I say here's X amount of money, submit to me overhead. Like, are you supposed to like do that or like do a postdoc at the same time, or you not do that as a postdoc? And maybe you do that for your like professor. I don't know. There's all that. I don't know. There's all that like.
That's a good question with the postdoc thing specifically, because often postdocs are hired to teach, right? I don't know about your specific postdoc.
So, yeah, it's different.
Yeah. So when I got the fellowships that I got, like as an assistant professor, FSC, I think it's true, at least in the College of Arts and Sciences, that you have to sign like a memorandum of understanding when you apply for these fellowships. So like it was understood that if I got any, I could take them and I wouldn't have to teach the next year when I had them, but I had to come back to FSU and teach. I couldn't use it as an opportunity to get another job, if that makes sense. So you have to sign something saying like you can have this year. And there's a department to department, they'll, usually if you receive like a year-long writing fellowship, it's not going to be the same as your salary financially, but FSU will agree to kind of like top off the fellowship you got, make it equivalent to your salary, provided that you sign the document saying, again, you'll come back and continue to work at FSU. So I'm not sure if it precisely works the same for postdocs, but it's probably something along those lines.
Any questions? Talk about
book project got a fellowship for that book. Was that specifically to humanities or something like that, or could it be public administration as a topic you want to explore?
So for the Schomburg Fellowship, that was humanities specific. So it's also it was a fellowship to use the holdings of the New York Public Library. So I suppose if you had a project like public administration related that was related to the holdings at the library, I think you'd be eligible for that. And the other one I got, the McKnight Fellowship, is a Florida Education Fund fellowship for like minoritized populations, minoritized professors, and graduate students in Florida. So that I think was not field specific at all. That could have been a professor of any field.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can speak also to the postdoc question. You do want to run all of these foundation awards, through your home university, but as you start to negotiate for positions, like permanent positions, then you can, like if you obtained a job at another institution, then you can write a grant proposal through them, even though you're here. Because we did that. When we got jobs at Auburn, then we were allowed to write like the RL1 and other types of STEM proposals through that university. And so, so you can just negotiate and talk to both institutions. All right. So last but not least.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so hands left. How many of you are humanities people here at this point? Okay, a couple. Grads, I know you said you're a postdoc. Any grad students then? Okay, but not humanities grad students. Okay. Well, some of these might still be relevant, and we'll forge ahead because they're also being recorded. We gotta click back onto it. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna talk about three specific funding mechanisms. The Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship, which replaced the one Dr. Hicks said she applied for, which was the Completion Fellowship. The Charlotte Newcomb Dissertation Fellowship, and the Fulbright US Student Program. So all of you who are still grad students, and even you postdocs, might be interested in hearing about Fulbright. So stick around for that at least, because there is also a postdoc Fulbright version.
Sure, we just had a postdoc Fulbright.
Yeah, and so there's long been a anybody could use the Scholar Award, potentially be competitive for a Fulbright postdoc. But they're introducing each year, there's more and more that are actually allocated to their postdoc award. It's pretty cool. And so the Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship is a major one-year fellowship for humanities fields or interpretive social sciences. So more like qualitative, humanistic social sciences. They don't care as much about your discipline, more about the methodologies and types of questions you're asking. Any time period, any area is fine. It's pretty broad. No citizenship requirements for this one either. And the idea of this one, so like I said, they replaced a longstanding dissertation completion fellowship. Basically, they reallocated their funding and said, instead of giving you money to finish a project you've already started, we'd like to inject a whole bunch of money into the beginning of your dissertation to allow you to go in directions you might not without that additional funding. So as I said, it's a major award. It's $52,000. And the proposal basically wants you to imagine, well, what would you do with your dissertation if you had an extra year and more money than your stipend? What ways would you go with it? What new directions would you do? And how could you do something that's truly innovative? So as you might have guessed, innovation is the keyword for this fellowship. And they specifically say that they seek to expand the range of research methodologies, formats, and areas of inquiry traditionally considered suitable for the dissertation. So they want to see you do things like maybe instead of a written monograph for the dissertation, you do a digital humanities project that has a website component. Or you do a lot of working with actual communities outside of academia. You get out of the university entirely. And so a good way, I think, of giving you the idea of things that are suitable for this. In the first year they introduced this award, we had 3 winners out of 45 nationally at FSU. One of them did a dissertation as a rabbi. So she's a violinist by training, but wants to study or does study Basically Pharrell Williams and his interlocutors in Virginia Beach. So NERD and the Neptunes, and what that says about Southern hip hop at this time and place in America. So since she's a violinist by training, she wanted to learn how to produce an album in the style of Pharrell's production. So she found a person to be her outside mentor who is a producer in the area. And that's her outside mentor, that's her professional development. She's working in a studio, she's learning how to actually produce. So along with an album, she'll have a website that is sort of interpretively explains the research she did, includes some teaching materials as well, and catalogs a lot of her research materials. So she's also doing like going to festivals and interviewing people about the experience of going to a festival. And so like all those interview notes get added to this website. But there's no written dissertation, right? Like she's not submitting a 5-chapter dissertation to her committee. She is submitting this body of work. Another student, he was also in musicology. His project is just a written dissertation, and he's graduated by now. He has I think he's at Indiana University. He got a job there. It is just a written dissertation, so he didn't change the format of what the dissertation looks like. But his research takes place in Nigeria, Great Britain, New York, and Atlanta. He's multi-language, multi-site archival work. And one of his big innovations is that he's using Yoruba epistemology about afterlives as actually like the theoretical basis for the way he's doing this work. So he's working with an African scholar from Harvard was his outside mentor, and his research funding mentor, allowing him to go do all these places he needed to do the work. Our third winner was from Modern Languages, and she works on sort of the borderland between Haiti and Santo Domingo. So she's blending two different historiographical traditions, one that is largely Francophone, the other that is mostly Spanish, because that is split into two countries that were colonies of France and Spain, respectively. So she's interested in this borderland area that forces her to be blending these two sort of different narrative traditions into one body of work, but also she's making an ethnographic film. So she's working with a filmmaker, learning film production techniques, and in addition to writing a dissertation, she's doing basically a documentary film. So fairly different things, allowing them to spread in different ways. They all had to work with people who had to teach them new skills. Some, more dramatic than others. But that's the point of this one. It basically asking you like, well, what would you do if you could do whatever you wanted for your dissertation? The application itself requires a 7-page, that's double-spaced, proposal. Your personal statement is optional. Say all three of them wrote the personal statement, and I think it matters. So even though it's optional, I would treat it as not optional if you choose to apply. Bibliography, and only a single letter of recommendation. The proposal is definitely the main thing. And what I think a lot of people do wrong with this one when they apply to it is they think that 7-page proposal should be describing what their dissertation is. It should be describing your fellowship year. This fellowship specifically gives you a stipend, money for an outside mentor, money for research, and money for professional development. So really you should be telling them how you're using that money in that fellowship year to get to eventually doing the dissertation you say you want to do. So yes, you need to describe the dissertation, but what you should really be talking about is the additional training you're going to do. What skills don't you have that you need to do this dream dissertation? Is that, are you going to take classes in something like GIS? Do you need to learn coding? Do you need to learn filmmaking? Do you need to learn how to produce an album in a studio? Whatever those things are, tell them that you're going to be using their money for that. Who will be your outside mentor in the way that your outside mentor can either be somebody at your home institution outside of your home discipline. So if you're in the history department, you could work with a sociologist, and that could be your outside mentor. Or it can be somebody outside of your university entirely. So if there's like a community group who's doing work with populations that you're trying to study or wanting to understand, you could partner with, you could be mentored by somebody who works in that community foundation. So you're going to tell them who that outside mentor is going to be and why that outside mentor makes sense, because they also give that mentor $2,000 of your dollars. And then what will your actual research activities be in that fellowship year? So the key to the proposal for this one is describe the fellowship year not the overall project for the bulk of those 7 written pages. Moving on to the Charlotte Newcomb. Charlotte Newcomb Dissertation Fellowship is specifically for research on religion, ethics, values, morality. This is a dissertation completion fellowship. So this does fund specifically the final year of dissertation writing. So there's a couple different types of dissertation fellowships out there. There's some that fund dissertation research, others that fund the writing, the completion. This is the latter. This one is interesting. So, most of the people who have won it are from humanities and social sciences. Those are the primary disciplines over time that have won this award. But they are open to people in STEM fields as well, as long as religion, ethics, and values are central to your work. So I could see like studying psychology or neuroscience, or cognitive science or things like that being potentially competitive for this one if you are dealing with questions related to those areas. They don't really care though. Within, like, if you're doing work that falls into religion, ethics, and values, they don't care if you're working on the ancient past, modern day, they don't care where in the world you're working. It's all fair game as long as you can make a pitch that you fit into those particular areas that they're interested in. What they really care for this one, so this one is a sort of 2-tier district application process. In the first, you will turn in a 3-page description, and if you're selected as a finalist, you then have a full proposal due. So most people will be focusing on this 3-page because that's the first hurdle you've got to jump over. What they really want you to do is tell them why what you study matters. And they want you to say why it is dealing with normative questions. So not just a descriptive project, not just describing the way things are, but making some pitch about the way things ought to be. And they're particularly interested for people whose work exists at the intersection of scholarship and moral inquiry. They do say they want it in accessible language because reviewers are drawn from all sorts of areas, right? Like all the areas that people win from, those are all the places that somebody might be reading this out of. So accessible language matters. That means the whole thing, not just don't use jargon, but like when you're explaining the stakes of your research, and this is true for almost everything that you all will be interested in applying for, people outside of your field need to understand why people in your field care about that question. All of our fields have individual debates. Those debates might be really important to our field, but they don't matter outside of it. So your significance can't just be based in one of those in-field debates, conversations. You need to be able to tell the reviewers why it matters outside of your field. And finally, moving on to the Fulbright U.S. student program. So if you need to go overseas, Fulbright is a great way to do it. Fulbright is open to people in all degrees, all different disciplines, all fields. You do have to be a U.S. citizen to do a Fulbright. Well, to do the U.S. student Fulbright. There are Fulbrights that will send students from everywhere else to the United States. So these are the ones. This is intended to send U.S. students overseas. There's a couple different award types you can do a Fulbright, but the main one I'm going to talk about is the research award, which allows you to go basically spend an academic year doing your own self-directed research, which can be either like an academic project or a creative project overseas. Fulbright operates in, at this point, 160 countries around the world. It gives you time and country to explore. It gives you access to, if there's archives in that country or data in that country you need. If you're in a STEM field and you want to go work in a lab overseas, we have a student right now, she's in her 2nd year being in Germany, started as a Fulbright, she found another grant to extend it for a year. She is using MRIs to study brains because she studies depression. And so she found a lab that had a very different form of analysis than her lab at FSU uses, and she wanted to go learn how they use it and what they do. They use actual human models and MRIs. Here she was using mice. So she made a pitch, she found a place to go, and she's doing great, cool work over there. She already graduated, so now it's basically a postdoc. And she's there doing a 2nd year of research in Germany. So Fulbright, basically you can make it what you want. They're not looking for research on any particular areas. If you have a reason, a compelling reason, you need to go to another country to do research, Fulbright can be a really good way to do it. Some countries will require language proficiency, some will not. So depending on the country you want to go to, like Nella only had fairly rough German, but she didn't really need it. Doesn't really matter. Germany just wants a recommended level of novice. But my understanding is in Germany, if you're there and you speak to them in German, they're going to be like, okay, that's fine, but let's speak in English because we all speak English. We have a robust application support process for Fulbright at FSU. For those of you interested in applying, we'll have an intent to participate due in June, and then we basically work with you over the summer, aiming toward a campus deadline in September. So we go through a sort of campus review process where you'll get feedback on your application from us before submitting it in October to the actual Fulbright. So a couple that we've just had from FSU recently to give you, again, a sense of what can be done through a Fulbright. We had a student who went to World War I to research and write a novel set. Sorry, he didn't go to. He went to France to study and write his novel on World War I, sort of the home front in France during World War I. Another student found a joint award that let her spend 4 months in Greece and 4 months in Turkey to go study art history related to Byzantine Empire. A student went to Bulgaria to study particularly gender in folklore and like Bulgarian epics. She's now an FSU employee. We've had a couple students go to Brazil, but one studied women-led drumming ensembles in Brazil and sort of the culture around them and just documented them, learned how to drum with them, immersed herself in them. And then, as I said, Fulbright is pretty flexible. You can also just go teach English through it. So if you have an interest in international education, you just want to go like teach English for a year, you can do that through Fulbright. It doesn't have to be related to your actual research at all. You can go overseas and teach English. Obviously, that's mostly in countries where English is not the, like you're not going to go to the UK to teach English. Right. You can also do graduate degree enrollment. So if you so the same guy who did the Yoruba epistemology, he applied for a Fulbright before that. He's a PhD student at FSU, but if he had gotten his Fulbright, it would have allowed him to go do a master's in African studies in the UK and then come back and finish his PhD at FSU. So you can do that. You can go get a master's for a year through Fulbright and then, come back and finish your timeline at FSU. Or if you, again, if you time it, like application is due in October, you're eligible to apply for a Fulbright until you have your PhD. After that, you apply to the Fulbright Scholar Program, which is where there are some postdoc offerings. So if you're going to graduate in May of next year, but you apply by October, that's fine. You'll get your PhD before your Fulbright would start, but not before the application would be due. So that way you can basically turn a Fulbright into a postdoc. So this student went and did. She did art therapy at FSU and then went and did a master's in sports psychology in Scotland. The problem with the Fulbright application is that it's really short. The entire research proposal is 6,000 characters, which is basically a page and 3/5 of a second page. And so you've got 9 months of research you're trying to pitch to them, and you've got 6,000 characters to tell them what you're doing, why it matters, and why you really need to be in that country to do it. So that's why we have the robust application process for it. You're trying to fit so much information into a very little space. The main things you need to address are feasibility. Of course, that's come up repeatedly today. Every proposal needs to talk about feasibility. And then also access. Like if you're going to say you're going to go to Italy to do archival research, you need to make it very clear you actually can get into the archives you say you're going to use and that they have the things you need in them. Most countries will require an affiliate if you're doing a study research type of work. So if you're going there to do research, they're going to expect you to have somebody who basically acts as like your advisor for your time in that country. They're not just going to set you loose in the country and expect you to run around for 9 months. They want you to have like a home base who can sort of anchor you into an intellectual community, provide resources as needed, and advice throughout your time in that country. Somebody at a university will almost always work as a affiliate, but other countries are a little bit more loose and might say, a contact at an NGO could be fine, government ministry could be okay, a range of different like cultural institutions might be fine. Countries set a lot of their own rules for Fulbright, so it depends. It varies all over the place. But if you are considering a Fulbright, you should know that it can take a while to find an affiliate, especially in Europe, because typically people don't start doing their outreach to find an affiliate until the summer, and all of the European faculty are on their summer vacations and are by law not allowed to check their work emails, right? So sometimes students go like 3 months without ever hearing back from somebody they emailed. So if you're thinking about a Fulbright, this is the part that often takes the longest. It's just finding somebody who can be a host for you during that award. And I think that's the end of what I have. Yeah. Any questions on those three? Or things adjacent? Yeah.
With most Fulbrights, can you propose something shorter term?
It depends. Some of them will. Like I think Germany has a 6-month version. The number one answer in Fulbright is it depends because so much of it is country dependent.
Right.
Many of them will dictate like this is basically an academic year term, but some countries have shorter terms of it.
So it would explicitly be, we have like a 9-month one and we have a 3-month, maybe it's not.
Sometimes it will explicitly be that. Like a couple of years ago, we had a student go to Israel and she got a 4-month one specifically. So that was a particular PhD level one that she could apply for. It was just 4 months. I think Germany says it as like you can dictate whether it's going to be 6 months or 9 months, but they want you to tell them in the grant, like in the proposal, and explain why you're requesting the shorter time. If you are requesting a shorter time. So some of them will be specific offering at a particular length, others will be, there might be some flexibility and you need to tell us if you want that flexibility.
I sort of felt very encouraged when you talked about the Charlotte one, this fellowship, I'm like, oh yeah, that's oh, for that one, this social science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it says like this scholarship reports that's the literature informs the general body of the literature, right? And so more inquiry of people, not that word, right? So it's probably doesn't. Late, I'm toward the end. My decision to mention about during the summer. That something I would explore fine.
Well, the Spencer will be due, I think, in October or November. So you'd be graduated before it would due.
No, this one, the one you talk about the Charlotte.
Oh, sorry, that's what I got. Yeah, Charlotte Newcomb will be due in the fall. So you'll have graduated before the application will be due. Yeah, and I would say it's probably not worth extending your timeline just to apply to something you might not get.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, for the first one, you said for the first year. So that means you would have not started or?
So it's for the first year of your dissertation work. So typically this is one people apply to in their second year of coursework, depending on how the timeline of your program works. But if, you know, in many programs you transition from like around year 3 is when you transition into candidacy. That's basically sort of around that same time as when you would apply for this one. They just want you to have at least 1 year left in your timeline after you complete their fellowship. They don't want to be funding the writing stage. They want to be funding the sort of, the formative research stage of the dissertation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is there a citizenship requirement for these?
There is not for the Charlotte Newcomb or the Mellon ACLS. They are both open to anybody. You just have to be enrolled at a U.S. institution. Yeah.
And so the Fulbright is US.
Fulbright is US based. I mean, there is the Fulbright foreign student program, but if you're already here in the US, you missed your chance to apply for it because you apply for it before you come to school in the US.
Oh, I see.
It funds your education in the US. This is the one intended to send US students overseas. It sends people from overseas to do education.
And I'm also assuming there's like a list of countries that feel like I don't know, travel advisory levels and those and stuff like that applies to which countries that you can go to.
Yeah, I mean, every year for Fulbright, they will come out with their list of countries that are participating. And I mean, usually that list is accurate, although, you know, like, yes, suddenly when Ukraine was invaded, Ukraine fell off as an option, right? They weren't going to send students to Ukraine. But Fulbright won't so there's also a difference if you're an enrolled student at FSU, you might not by FSU be allowed to go to a country,
Yeah.
that Fulbright might still operate in. So. Like FSU might tell you to question your travel if it's a level 3 country, but Fulbright might still be operating there and send you there. So there might be a conflict between student travel and Fulbright's own process. Yeah.
All right, well, thank everyone, and please respond to our survey whether or not you're continuing, because we want feedback, and then if you're continuing, we want to know so you get communications. Okay, so I hope you guys felt that it was helpful, and you're welcome to drop in on any of the sessions tomorrow if it's in your area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marwa was able.
Yeah. Because it's gonna be, yeah. And we have to be on time because 4 o'clock we need the room, right? I don't have slides from radio speakers. Oh, so. We got trainees, and I got. But these two haven't heard back.
Okay, maybe I'll print something out that's like 5-minute warning or 2 or something.
Okay, yeah, that's good, yeah. And we can let people know too, I can let people know tonight, because they're being thing right after. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they need to do much to like